Clara Bennett's hands shook so hard she couldn't work the buttons at her throat. She stood at the foot of a stranger's bed, his wife of 6 hours, and when Ethan Walker stepped toward her, she flinched back like she'd been struck. "Please," she whispered. "It hurts to be looked at like that." The big mountain cowboy stopped cold. He set the lamp down real slow. He took off his hat, and he backed away toward the door. "Then I'll wait, ma'am," he said, quiet as falling snow. "I got nothing in this whole world but time, and I'll spend every hour of it waiting on you. If a story about a broken woman and a patient man is the kind of story that stays with you, go on and subscribe to this channel right now and stay with me all the way to the end, because you will not believe how this one finishes. And do me a kindness. Leave a comment and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing just how far my stories travel." Now let's begin. He had married her that afternoon with 2 witnesses and a preacher who kept looking at his pocket watch, and now the whole weight of what they'd done sat between them like a third person in the room. Clara couldn't make her fingers work. That was the truth of it. She'd been undressing herself since she was 5 years old, and now in front of this mountain of a man with his quiet gray eyes, she couldn't so much as free a single button. "Leave 'em," Ethan said. She looked up. "The buttons," he said. "Leave 'em be. Ain't a thing here that's got to happen tonight." He hung his hat on the peg by the door, and he did it careful like the hat was made of glass. "You take that bed. I'll be out by the fire." "You'll—" her voice cracked. "You'll sleep out there. I've slept in worse places than my own front room, ma'am. I'm your wife now." "You're a person," he said. "And a person that's scared don't owe anybody a single thing, least of all me." She hadn't cried once, not when the letter came. Not when she sold her mother's ring for the stage fare. Not when the town of Ashford Creek had watched her climb down off that wagon with everything she owned in one carpetbag. But she nearly cried then, because she had come all this way expecting a man to take what he'd paid for. And instead, he was pulling a wool blanket off the shelf and shaking it out like the matter was already settled. "Why'd you send for me?" she asked. He stopped. "You already know why. Letter said it plain." "It said you needed a woman to keep a house." "It did." "Men who need houses kept don't marry the woman," Clara said. "They hire her, and when they're done, they turn her out." Ethan was quiet a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had gone even lower. "That happened to you before?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. He nodded once slow, like a man filing something away he wouldn't forget. "Ain't gonna happen here," he said, and he lay down on the hard floor by the hearth in his boots and his shirt, and he pulled the blanket up, and he turned his face to the wall so she could have her privacy. Clara Bennett lay awake most of that night listening to a stranger breathe, waiting for the moment the kindness would run out. It never did. 6 days before she had stepped off the stage in Ashford Creek with 40 cents and no plan past sundown. The town wasn't much. A church, a bank, a mercantile, and a saloon that did more business than the other 3 combined. But the people in it looked at her the way people always looked at a woman traveling alone, like she was a problem that had just become theirs. "You lost honey," said a woman outside the mercantile, though her voice held no kindness in it. 2 other women stood beside her, and all 3 had that hungry, watchful look Clara knew too well. "I'm looking for the Walker place," Clara said. The 3 women went dead silent. Then one of them laughed an ugly, disbelieving little sound. "The Walker place. That's right. You're the one then." The first woman's mouth curled. "The one he sent off for. Lord have mercy. I heard he'd finally gone and done it, but I didn't half believe it." "Do you know the way?" Clara asked. She was too tired to play whatever game this was. "Honey." The woman stepped in close, and her voice dropped to something almost gentle, which was worse. "You turn right back around and get on that stage. Ethan Walker is not a man. He's a thing that lives up on that mountain. You understand me? His own mother wouldn't go up there, God rest her. His mother's dead. Everything Ethan Walker ever loved is dead," the woman said, and most folks reckon he had a hand in it. Clara felt the cold slide down her spine. But she'd felt cold before. She'd learned a long time ago that a frightened woman who let it show got eaten alive, so she lifted her chin. Which way is the mountain? The three women exchanged a look, and the first one pointed north up toward the tree line and said, "You go on then, but don't say Ashford Creek didn't warn you. That man buried a wife already." Clara's heart stopped. He was married, but the women had already turned their backs, and their laughter drifted after her all the way down the street. Hint: it was the blacksmith who told her the truth, or a piece of it. He was an older man, big through the shoulders, with burn scars up both forearms, and a face that didn't seem built for cruelty. When she came to ask if anyone could carry her up the mountain, he set down his hammer and looked at her a good long while. "You really going up there?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I've got nowhere else to be," Clara said. Something in her voice must have reached him, because his hard look softened. "Sit down a minute, miss. Rest your feet." He pulled a stool over. "You want the truth, or you want what the town'll tell you?" "The truth. I've had a lifetime of the other." The blacksmith wiped his hands on his apron. "Ethan Walker come to this valley 8 years back with a young wife and a wagon and about $2 to his name. Sweet girl she was. Name of Sarah." He paused. "First winter up there she took sick. Fever. Ethan rode down that mountain in a blizzard. I mean a killin' blizzard, miss, the kind that takes men rode down here to fetch the doctor." Clara waited. Doc wouldn't go. The blacksmith's jaw tightened. Said the mountain road was death in that weather. Said he wasn't risking his own neck for squatters. Ethan begged him. Went down on his knees in the street, they say, in front of the whole town. And every last soul in Ashford Creek stood at their windows and watched a man beg, and not one of us went up that mountain with him. "His wife," Clara whispered. "Gone by mornin'." The blacksmith looked at his hands. "And you know what this town did after they decided it was easier to make Ethan the monster than to admit what we'd let happen? Started saying he done it himself. Started saying he was cursed. Because a monster on the mountain lets everybody sleep at night." He met her eyes. "That man ain't heartless, miss. This town is. Ethan Walker's just the only one honest enough to stop pretending otherwise." Clara sat very still, and for the first time in a long time she felt something other than fear. She felt like maybe she wasn't the only one who'd been thrown away. "How do I get up there?" she asked. Ethan Walker had come down off that mountain exactly once a month for 8 years, and every single time the town emptied the street in front of him. She learned that firsthand. The day he came for her, because he'd gotten her wire because a man of his word came when he said he'd come, she was waiting outside the mercantile with her carpet bag, and she watched Ashford Creek fold in on itself at the sight of a single rider. Mothers pulled children indoors. Shopkeepers found reasons to be elsewhere. A man crossed the whole width of the street just so he wouldn't have to share a boardwalk with him. And Ethan rode through all of it like he didn't feel a thing. But she saw. She saw the way his jaw was set. She saw a man who had learned to wear his neighbor's hatred like an old coat, heavy familiar and never quite warm enough. He drew up in front of her and touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Bennett." He was younger than she'd braced for, and bigger. 35 maybe. Gray eyes and a week of dark beard and hands that could have circled her waist. She understood looking at him why the town found it so easy to call him a monster. He was made on a scale that frightened small people. "Mr. Walker," she said, "you still want to come up?" He asked it plain. "Nobody'd blame you if you didn't. I'll pay your fare back east either way. I ain't the marrying kind of catch, and I know it." Behind her, she heard one of the mercantile women snicker, and something rose up in Clara Bennett that she hadn't felt in years. Pure hot defiance. "I'd be obliged for the ride, Mr. Walker," she said loud enough for the whole street to hear. "And I'll thank the good people of this town to mind their own affairs from here on." For 1 second, just one, she saw the corner of Ethan's mouth move. Not a smile. He wasn't a man who had smiles to spare, but close. He swung down off his horse. He took her carpet bag before she could stop him, and he handed her up into the wagon with a gentleness that made no sense in a man that size. "Ma'am," he said. And Ashford Creek watched the monster of the mountain drive away with the strangest woman they'd ever seen, the one who'd chosen him. The ride up took the better part of the afternoon, and for the first hour neither of them said a word. It was Clara who broke it. "They told me you killed her," she said. Ethan's hands didn't so much as twitch on the reins. Figured they would. "I don't believe it." Now his hands did move, just a small thing, a tightening. "Why not? You don't know me." "The blacksmith told me what really happened," Clara said. "About the doctor, about the storm." For a long time Ethan said nothing at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone rough as gravel. "Big Tom told you that." "He did. Tom's the only man in that valley worth a damn." Ethan stared straight ahead. "You want to know something, ma'am? I don't hardly blame him for the story anymore. Losing Sarah, that was the storm and the fever and a coward with a medical license. But calling me a killer—" He shook his head slow. "That's just folks needing a place to put the ugly thing they did. And I've got wide enough shoulders, so I carry it. Been carrying it 8 years. That's not fair to you." "Fair?" Ethan almost laughed, and it was a bitter sound. "Ma'am, I gave up on fair the same night I gave up on Sarah." Clara looked at her hands. "Then why send for a wife? A man who's given up doesn't do that." Ethan was quiet a while. The wagon rocked. Somewhere off in the trees a hawk cried. "Truth," he said. "I told you. I've had a lifetime of everything but. I'm tired of the sound of my own voice being the only voice up there," Ethan said, and it cost him something to say it. She could hear it. 8 years, ma'am. 8 years of no one to say good morning to. No one to sit across a table from. A man can stand a lot, but he can't stand that forever. It hollows you out." He glanced at her quick, then away. "I wasn't looking for a servant. I put it that way in the letter, 'cause I figured no decent woman'd answer if I told the truth, which is that I'm just a lonesome man who don't want to die up there without one single soul knowing his name was Ethan and not Monster." He shook his head. "You can climb right back down if that scares you." Clara looked at this enormous, gentle, hollowed-out man, and she thought about the town below that had thrown them both away. "You want to know why I answered your letter?" she said. "If you want to tell me." "Because I was going to die too," Clara said simply. "Not on a mountain. In a boarding house in Kansas City, with the rent 3 weeks past due, and a landlord who'd started looking at me the way that town looked at you." She swallowed. "I'd been a cook, a good one. And when the family I worked for lost their money, they turned me out with a week's wages and told me I ought to be grateful. There was a man I was meant to marry once. He found a woman with a dowry." Her voice was very steady, and that steadiness was its own kind of scar. "So don't you tell me to climb back down, Ethan Walker. I answered your letter for the exact same reason you wrote it. Because I couldn't stand the quiet either." The wagon went on up the mountain, and when Ethan spoke again, all he said was, "Then I reckon we understand each other." But he said it soft. And that was the moment, though neither of them knew it yet, that two thrown-away people stopped being strangers. They were married 3 days later. Not for love. Clara wanted that understood, and she said so standing in the doorway of the little cabin the morning Ethan told her he'd ride down and fetch the preacher. "I won't have you marry me out of pity," she said. "I'd rather keep house as your hired woman than be pitied into a ring." Ethan set down the axe he'd been sharpening. "Ma'am, it ain't pity." "Then what is it?" "It's them." He nodded down the mountain. "It's Ashford Creek. Right now, every soul in that valley thinks you're up here living in sin with the monster. And when they get done whispering it, they'll come up here and make your life a misery for it, same as they done to me. A hired woman they can ruin. A wife." He shook his head. "A wife they got to respect even if they hate her. It's the one shield I can put between you and them." He picked the axe back up. "That's all it is. A shield. I won't ask you for one thing more than to wear my name. You have my word before God on that." And that was how Clara Bennett came to be married in a mountain cabin with Big Tom the blacksmith and his wife as witnesses, wearing her one good dress to a man who promised her nothing but protection. The preacher rushed the words. He wouldn't look Ethan in the eye. And when it was done, he took his fee and got back on his horse so fast he forgot his own Bible on the table. Ethan found it after, turned it over in his big hands, left his good book behind, he said, in his hurry to be shut of me. He set it careful on the mantel. I'll write it down to him next month. He doesn't deserve it back, Clara said. Ethan looked at her surprised. Reckon not. But a man's word and a man's kindness ain't things you spend only on folks who earned 'em, ma'am. If they were, they wouldn't be worth much. He set his hat on his head. Elsewise, I'd have gone hard and mean years ago. And then the town'd finally be right about me. Clara watched him walk out to see the guests off, and she thought, that's the strongest thing I ever heard a man say, and he doesn't even know he said it. Which brought them back to that first night. To Clara, standing at the foot of the bed, hands shaking, unable to work a single button. To Ethan, setting down the lamp and taking off his hat and backing away. To his voice soft as falling snow. I got nothing but time, and I'll spend every hour of it waiting on you. He slept on the floor that night, and the next, and the one after that. On the fourth morning, Clara came out to the cold hearth and found him already gone to the stock, and she stood there, looking at the folded blanket on the hard floorboards and something in her chest cracked clean down the middle. She'd been braced her whole life for men to take. She had no earthly idea what to do with a man who only gave. When he came in for the noon meal, she'd made him something, a real meal, the first she'd cooked in his kitchen, biscuits and gravy and coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in. And when he sat down and tasted it, he went very still. Something wrong? Clara asked, suddenly afraid. Ethan looked up at her, and his gray eyes were wet, and he was clearly ashamed of it. 8 years, he said, hoarse. 8 years I ate standing up over the stove. Nobody's cooked me a meal in 8 years, ma'am. He looked back down at the plate like it was the finest thing he'd ever been handed. I'd forgot what it was to be somebody's something. You're my husband, Clara said quietly. I'm a name on a paper that keeps you safe. That's what we agreed. I know what we agreed. She sat down across from him. But you slept on the floor for 4 nights, so I wouldn't be scared. And I'm going to cook for the man who did that, Ethan Walker, whether it's in the agreement or not. He didn't answer. He couldn't. He just ate every bite, and he thanked her twice. And when he went back out to the fields, he walked a little straighter than he had that morning. That was the first day Clara Bennett stopped being afraid of her husband. It was not, however, the day her troubles ended, because Ashford Creek was not done with them. The first sign of it came a week later on a still hot summer morning when 3 riders came up the mountain road. Clara heard the horses before she saw them, and by the time they came into view, Ethan was already standing in the yard, and she understood from the set of his shoulders that these were not friends. The man in front was fine dressed for the mountains. Broadcloth coat, silver watch chain, a hat that had never known honest sweat. He drew up his horse and looked down at Ethan with the lazy contempt of a man who had never once been told no. Walker, he said. Mr. Crane. Ethan didn't reach for his hat. You're a ways from your bank, Silas Crane. Clara would come to know that name well. He owned the bank in Ashford Creek and the mercantile and the paper on half the ranches in the valley, and he owned them the way a spider owns a web patient and total. I'll come to it plain, Crane said. I hear you took a wife. Word travels. It surely does. Crane's eyes drifted past Ethan to where Clara stood in the doorway, and they moved over her like she was livestock at auction. And a fine-looking one at that. I confess I didn't think you had it in you. Ethan stepped sideways, just a step, a small thing, but it put his body square between Crane's gaze and his wife. State your business, Crane. Crane smiled, and it never touched his eyes. My business is your land, Walker, same as it's been for 2 years. You've got water up here, the only reliable spring on this whole range, and I've got buyers who'd pay handsome to run cattle on it. He leaned forward on his saddle horn. I've offered you a fair price 3 times now. And I've told you 3 times. It ain't for sale. Everything's for sale, Walker. That's the first thing they ought to teach in schoolhouses and never do. Crane's smile widened. The question is only ever the price and the pressure. And a man alone on a mountain is one thing, but a man with a wife. His gaze slid back toward Clara, and this time it lingered. A man with a wife has got something to lose. Wouldn't you say? The silence that followed had a weight to it. Clara felt her heart begin to pound. Ethan Walker took 1 step forward, and though he never raised his voice, never reached for the rifle by the door, something in the air changed so completely that all 3 of Crane's riders shifted their hands closer to their guns. "Mr. Crane," Ethan said, very quiet, very slow. "I have let this valley call me a killer for 8 years. 8 years I let 'em say it 'cause it cost me nothing but my good name, and I'd already lost the thing that mattered more." He took another step. "But you just stood in my yard and looked at my wife like she was something you could bid on. So I'm going to say this once, and I want you to carry it back down that mountain and remember it real clear." His voice dropped lower still. "You come near her. You send a man near her. You so much as let her name cross your lips in that saloon of yours, and every ugly thing this town ever whispered about Ethan Walker is going to turn out true. You hear me, Silas?" Nobody moved. Then Crane laughed, but it came out thin, and Clara saw even from the doorway that the banker had gone a shade paler. "Big words," Crane said, gathering his reins, "for a man with everything to lose and no one to help him keep it." He wheeled his horse around. "You've got till the end of summer, Walker. Sign the paper, take the money, and take your bride somewhere she'll be treated like a lady. Or don't." He looked back over his shoulder, and now the smile was gone, and what was underneath it was cold as well water. "But if you don't, I promise you this valley's got ways of persuading stubborn men, and they don't all knock at the front door." Then he rode away, his 2 men falling in behind him, and Clara stood frozen in the doorway until the sound of the horses faded down the mountain. Ethan didn't move for a long time. "Ethan," she said finally. "He won't touch you." Ethan's voice was flat and certain and cold. "I swear it on Sarah's grave, Clara. He won't touch you." It was the first time he'd called her by her Christian name, and she noticed it even through her fear, and something in her held on to it. "What does he mean?" she asked. "Ways that don't knock at the front door." Ethan finally turned to look at her, and whatever was in his face, he tried to smooth it away before she could read it, but she'd spent her whole life reading men's faces to know when danger was coming, and she read his now. "Nothing you need to fret on tonight," he said. But she'd already seen it. He was afraid. Not for himself, she'd have staked her life that Ethan Walker hadn't feared a thing for his own sake in 8 years. He was afraid for her. That night, for the first time, when Ethan pulled the wool blanket down to make his bed on the floor, Clara stopped him. "No," she said. He went still. "Not the floor," she said. Her voice shook, but she made herself say it. "You've slept on that floor 11 nights, so I wouldn't be frightened. And I was frightened, but not of you, Ethan. Not for a long time now." She twisted her hands together. I can't yet. I don't know if I can be a real wife to you. There's things that happened before that I don't have the words for. When a man reaches for me, I still—" "You don't have to explain," Ethan said quietly. "Not to me, not ever. But I don't want you on the floor." She pressed on, her eyes bright. I want you to lie beside me. That's all. Just lie beside me so that if that man comes in the night, I'm not the only one who hears the door." She took a breath. Can we just try that tonight?" Ethan Walker looked at his wife for a long, long moment. And then he did the gentlest thing she had ever seen a man do. He folded the blanket back up. He set it on the shelf. And he lay down on top of the quilt on his own side of the bed, still in his shirt a careful foot of space between them, and he folded his hands on his chest like a man in church. "Like this?" he asked. "Like this," she whispered. For a while they lay in the dark, not touching 2 people who'd been thrown away, listening to each other breathe. "Ethan!" she said. "Ma'am, if Crane comes, if it comes to the ugly thing you said, he won't get near you. But if he does." Her voice was very small. "Promise me you won't die trying to save me. Promise me you won't leave me alone up here. Because I've been alone, Ethan, and I would rather be poor with you and hunted by that man than safe and alone ever again." A tear slid down into her hair. "I've had enough of being the one left behind." There was a long silence. Then in the dark, she felt him move. Slow, careful, asking with the motion giving her every chance to pull away. His big rough hand found hers on top of the quilt, and it closed over her fingers, warm and steady and gentle as anything she'd ever known. "Clara Walker," he said, and his voice was thick. "I have spent 8 years figuring the good Lord forgot my name. And then a woman with 40 cents and nowhere to go climbed up my mountain and cooked me biscuits and gravy and looked at me like I was a man instead of a monster." His hand tightened just a little. "I ain't going anywhere. Not tonight. Not this summer. Not ever. You hear me? They can have my land. They can have my good name. They took that years ago. But they will not have you, and they will not have me leaving you. That's the one thing in this whole world I've got left to swear on, and I'm swearing it." Clara Bennett lay in the dark, holding her husband's hand in a cabin on a mountain, with a rich man's threat hanging over them both, and a whole valley below that hated them for the crime of surviving. And she had never, in all her life, felt so safe. She didn't let go of his hand until morning, and when she woke and the light was coming gray through the window, and his hand was still wrapped around hers, she understood something she had never understood before, not once in all her years of being taken from and thrown away. Home wasn't a place. She'd never had a place. Home was the person who was still holding your hand when you woke up. She had married a stranger the town called a monster. She had found the only gentle thing left on that whole mountain. The trouble started, as most trouble in that valley did, with a wagon coming up the mountain road. Clara heard it first. She was at the stove when the rattle of wheels reached her, and she went cold all over because there was only one man in Ashford Creek who'd send a wagon where a rider could go faster. "Ethan!" she called out the door. "Someone's coming!" He was in from the stalk before the wagon cleared the trees, rifle already in his hand, and he pushed her behind him with one arm, the way a man moves a lamp out of a child's reach automatic without a word. But it wasn't Crane. It was a boy. 14, maybe 15, driving a mule and buckboard, and he pulled up in the yard, white-faced and out of breath, and looked at the rifle in Ethan's hand and nearly bolted. "Mr. Walker, please, I ain't here to make no trouble." "Then why are you here?" Ethan didn't lower the gun. "It's Big Tom," the boy gasped. "The blacksmith. He's hurt bad, Mr. Walker. Real bad. His forge blew a coal into the straw, and the whole shop went up, and a beam come down on him, and the doc won't come." The boy's voice cracked. "The doc won't come, sir. Same as—" He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. The words hung in the summer air between them, same as he wouldn't come for your Sarah. Ethan lowered the rifle. "Why'd Tom send you to me?" he asked, and his voice had gone strange. "Nobody in that valley sends for me. Not for 8 years. He didn't send me." The boy wiped his nose on his sleeve. "His wife did. Miss Ada. She said you was the only one who'd come. She said the whole town'll stand at their windows and watch him die and call it God's will. But Ethan Walker'll come 'cause he's the only Christian soul left in this valley." The boy swallowed. "Her words, sir, not mine." Clara watched something move across her husband's face. Grief and fury and a terrible old wound cracking open. "Get the medicine box," Ethan said to her, already moving for the barn. "The whole box, and blankets, and whiskey, the full bottle off the shelf, not the one I've opened." "Ethan?" Clara caught his arm. "Crane, if you ride down that mountain, you leave me up here alone. You swore—" He stopped, and she watched him tear himself in two right there in the yard, the promise to her against a dying man below. "Then you'll come with me," he said. "Me. You said you cooked for a rich family. You ever tend to burn?" "I've tended everything," Clara said. "I ran a kitchen with 8 fires and 6 careless girls. I've tended burns since I was 10 years old." "Then get in the wagon." Ethan swung up. "Boy, you ride ahead and you tell Ada Walker's coming. And you tell her he's bringing his wife and his wife knows burns." He looked at Clara as she climbed up beside him. "You sure once we ride down there the whole town sees you? There's no taking it back. You'll be the monster's wife to their faces, not just their whispers." "I've been called worse by better," Clara said. "Drive." He drove. They came down that mountain faster than any wagon had a right to, Ethan working the mule and the brake in turns, and Clara holding the medicine box in her lap, with both arms wrapped around it, and neither of them said a word until the town came into view, and the column of black smoke rising from the ruin of the blacksmith's shop. "Lord," Clara breathed. "You'll do fine," Ethan said, though she hadn't said she wouldn't. "Just don't let 'em rattle you. They'll try." They did. The whole street turned to watch them come in. Clara felt every eye of Ashford Creek land on her. The fine women from the mercantile, the men from the saloon, the shopkeepers, the church folk in their Sunday collars, all of them staring at the monster's wagon rolling into their town, like the devil himself had come to a barn raising. And Ethan Walker sat up straight and looked not one of them in the eye, and drove his wagon right up to the burning shop, where a woman was on her knees in the dirt beside a big broken man, and he handed the reins to nobody, and he jumped down, and he said, "Ada, I'm here. Tell me where he's hurt." The woman looked up at him with a face streaked black and wet and said, "Ethan, oh, thank God you came." And behind him, Clara heard the whole street of Ashford Creek go dead silent, because in 8 years, not one of them had ever heard those 2 words aimed at Ethan Walker. Thank God. Big Tom was in a bad way. Clara saw that the moment she knelt beside him. The beam had come down across his left leg and his side, and the burns ran up his arm to the shoulder, and he was gray as ash and only half conscious. "Miss Ada?" Clara said, taking charge in a voice she hadn't used in years. The kitchen voice, the voice that cut through smoke and panic. "I need clean water, all you've got. I need every clean cloth in your house. And I need someone to hold him still, because what I've got to do is going to hurt him worse before it helps." "Who?" Ada blinked at her. "I'm Clara, Ethan's wife, and I've tended burns most of my life, and your husband is going to live, but only if you do exactly what I say and don't waste 1 minute arguing. Can you do that?" Ada Walker. No relation. Just the sad coincidence of a common name in a small valley, nodded and scrambled to her feet. And so it was that the monster's wife knelt in the dirt of Ashford Creek's main street and fought for the life of the one man who'd ever been kind to her, while the whole town stood back and watched and did nothing until Ethan Walker rose up to his full height, turned around, and looked at them. "Well," he said. Nobody moved. "A man's dying in the street," Ethan said, and his voice carried the length of that town. "My wife's trying to save him. She needs water, and she needs cloth, and she needs strong hands, and you're all just standing there." He looked from face to face slow, and Clara even bent over the burns, felt the whole street flinch under his gaze. "Same as you stood there 8 years ago. You gonna do it again? You gonna stand at your windows and watch another good soul die 'cause helpin' means dirtying your hands?" His jaw worked. "Or is there one man among you with the guts to prove me wrong about this town?" For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. And then a young man, barely more than a boy, the saloon keeper's son, stepped off the boardwalk and said, "I'll fetch water, Mr. Walker," and ran for the well. And then another man moved, and another, and a woman brought her wash basket full of clean linens and set it down beside Clara, and knelt to help, saying, "Tell me what to do, ma'am, just tell me." And Ashford Creek, which had done nothing for 8 years, began slowly, shamefully, one soul at a time, to help. They worked over Big Tom for 2 hours. Clara cleaned and dressed the burns while Ethan and 3 other men set the crushed leg with a splint and a great deal of whiskey. And when it was done, when Tom's breathing had steadied and his color had come back, and Ada was weeping with relief into his good shoulder, Clara sat back on her heels in the dirt, filthy and exhausted, and looked up to find half the town of Ashford Creek looking down at her. Not with hatred, with something she had no name for. "You saved his life," Ada said. "You and Ethan. You saved my Tom's life." "He's not out of the woods," Clara said. "That leg has to be watched. And the burns'll want dressing twice a day for a fortnight. But he'll live, Miss Ada. He's too big and too stubborn to do anything else." Ada laughed a wet, broken, grateful laugh, and then she did something that made the whole street gasp. She took Clara's dirty hand in both of hers and kissed it. "Bless you," Ada whispered. "Bless you, child, and bless that man of yours. Whatever they say about him, whatever this whole rotten town says about Ethan Walker, I'll go to my grave saying he came when nobody else would. Twice now. He came for us twice." And Clara, who had braced her whole life for cruelty and had learned to be surprised by nothing found, she had no words at all. She just held Ada Walker's hands, and she looked up at her husband, standing over them both, like a wall against the world, and she thought, they're going to have to find a new story now, because the whole town just watched the monster save a life. She should have known Silas Crane would never allow it. He came out of the bank as they were loading the medicine box back into the wagon, and he came slow, and he came smiling, and the sight of that smile turned Clara's stomach. "Well, well," Crane said loud enough for the gathered crowd. "If it isn't the Good Samaritan of the mountain. Come down to play doctor, have you? Walker, since our real doctor showed the good sense to stay out of a fool's errand." Ethan didn't answer. He kept loading the wagon. "I'll tell you what I saw." Crane went on, turning now to address the crowd, playing them like a fiddle. "I saw a squatter and his hired bride come down here and put on a fine show for you all. Very fine, very touching." His voice sharpened. "But you'd do well to remember what he is underneath it. This is the same Ethan Walker who buried a wife on that mountain and never let a soul see the body. This is the man who—" "That's a lie." The words came out of Clara before she knew she'd spoken. The whole street turned to look at her. Crane's eyebrows rose in mock delight. "The bride speaks. I said that's a lie, Mr. Crane." Clara stepped out from behind the wagon, and she was shaking, but not with fear. She was past fear now, clean through to the other side of it. "And every man and woman standing here who's got a shred of honesty left knows it's a lie. His first wife died of fever, in a blizzard, because the doctor of this town wouldn't ride out to save her." She turned to the crowd. "You want to talk about who let people die? Ask yourselves who stood at their windows 8 years ago and watched a man beg on his knees in this very street. Ask yourselves who's the monster, the man who came down today to save Tom, or the town that let his wife die, and then blamed him for it to feel better about themselves." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Clara had ever heard. "You mind your tongue," Crane said, and the smile was gone now. "You're new here, girl. You don't know." "I know enough." Clara didn't back down an inch. "I know a good man when I've slept under his roof, and I know a coward when he hides behind a silver watch chain and other people's fear." She lifted her chin. "You threatened us, Mr. Crane, in our own yard. You want my husband's land and his water, and when he wouldn't sell you, looked at me like I was a thing to be bargained over. I heard you. And now I've said it out loud in front of your whole town. So if anything happens to us up on that mountain, every soul here will know exactly whose door to knock on." She had never in her life spoken like that to a powerful man. And Silas Crane's face went white, and then it went red, and Clara saw with a jolt of pure animal fear that she had made a real enemy, a mortal one, in the space of 30 seconds. "Get in the wagon, Clara," Ethan said quietly. She got in the wagon. But as Ethan climbed up beside her and took the reins, Crane found his voice again, and it came out low and vicious, and meant only for them. "You just made a mistake, girl," he said. "You and your monster both. I was going to offer you money. I was going to be generous." He smiled that terrible smile. "But now I think I'd rather you learn what happens to people who embarrass Silas Crane in his own town. End of Summer Walker. Sign or don't. It's all the same to me now, because either way—" He stepped back. "I'm going to enjoy watching what comes for you. Then Ethan snapped the reins, and they rolled out of Ashford Creek, and Clara didn't breathe again until the town was behind them. They rode in silence halfway up the mountain before Ethan spoke. "You shouldn't have done that." "I know. You made him an enemy, a real one." His hands were tight on the reins. "Crane's not like the town, Clara. The town's just weak. Weak I can handle. But Crane's got money, and he's got men, and he's got patience, and now he's got a reason that ain't about land anymore. Now it's about pride. And a man like that'll spend his last dollar and his last hour ruining the person who dented his pride." He shook his head. "You shouldn't have done it." "He called you a murderer to your face," Clara said. "In front of the whole town. I couldn't—" "I've been called worse. Not in front of me, you haven't." She turned in the seat to face him. "You want to know something, Ethan Walker? My whole life I let men say what they wanted about me. The family I cooked for called me lazy when I worked myself to the bone. The man who was supposed to marry me called me plain when he left me for a girl with money. I learned to just take it, stand there and take it and say nothing because saying something only ever made it worse." Her voice broke. "And today I watched a man save a life, and then watched another man call him a murderer for it, and I couldn't stand there and take it. Not one more time. Not about you." She wiped her eyes angrily. "So if I made an enemy, then I made an enemy. But I will not spend the rest of my life standing silent while people spit on the only person who's ever been kind to me." Ethan didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he reached over without looking at her, and he covered her hand with his the way he had that night in the dark. "The only person who's ever been kind to you," he repeated softly. "That's a hard thing to hear, Clara. That in 26 years I'm the only one. It's the truth. Then the world's been crueler to you than I knew." His hand tightened. "And I'm sorry for it. And I'm going to spend whatever summers I've got left trying to make up for a little of it." He was quiet a moment. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Next time you want to fight Silas Crane." He glanced at her, and there was the ghost of that not-quite smile. "You let me stand a little closer, so he's got to come through me to get to you. Deal?" Clara looked at their two hands joined on the wagon seat. "Deal," she whispered. The days that followed were the strangest of Clara's life, because for the first time she could remember they were good. Word of what happened in town spread not the way Crane wanted, but the truth of it carried up and down the valley by every soul who'd stood in that street and watched a supposed monster save a dying man. And the mountain, which had been a place of exile, began to have visitors. Ada Walker came first, 3 days later driving the buckboard herself with a basket of preserves in her lap. "Tom's mending," she announced before she'd even climbed down. "Ornery as a wet cat about laying still, which the doc says is the best sign there is. And I couldn't rest another night without coming up here to thank you both proper." She thrust the basket at Clara. "It ain't much, but there's peach, and there's blackberry, and there's a jar of Tom's honey, and Ada Walker don't come calling empty-handed Monsters Mountain, or no." Clara laughed, the first real laugh in longer than she could recall. "Come in, Miss Ada. I've got coffee on." And Ada came in, and she sat at Clara's table, and she talked for 2 hours about the town and the valley and her Tom, and the 8 long years the whole valley had gotten Ethan Walker wrong. And when she left, she hugged Clara at the door like they were old friends, and she said something Clara would hold on to for a long time. "You saved more than my husband's leg child. You know that." Ada nodded down the mountain. "You went and reminded that whole town they got souls. Half of 'em are ashamed of themselves now, and shame's the beginning of getting better. You lit a match, Clara Walker. Don't let nobody put it out." Then Big Tom sent word he wanted to see Ethan, and Ethan rode down nervous as Clara had ever seen him, though he'd never have called it that, and came back 3 hours later with a look on his face she'd never seen. "What is it?" she asked. "What happened?" Tom apologized. Ethan sat down heavy at the table like his legs had gone out from under him. 8 years, Clara. 8 years I've been the monster of that valley, and Tom Walker took my hand, and he said... Ethan's voice failed. He started again. "He said he was sorry he never came up the mountain in all that time. Said he believed me about Sarah from the start, but he was too much a coward to stand against the town and say so. Said watching me save his life woke him up to what a coward he'd been." Ethan pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes. "A man apologized to me, Clara, for thinking ill of me. I'd forgot I'd forgot people did that." Clara came around this table and put her arms around him from behind, and she felt him go rigid, not from fear, but from a kind of shock, the way a man freezes when he's given something he stopped believing existed. "You're not a monster, Ethan," she said into his hair. "You never were, and one by one they're all going to figure that out. Tom first, and then the rest. And Crane?" Her arms tightened. "Crane can go to the devil." Ethan laughed a real laugh. Rusty from disuse startled out of him, and he reached up and covered her forearms with his hands, where they crossed his chest, and they stayed like that a long while, and neither of them wanted to move. It couldn't last, of course. Clara knew that even as she let herself enjoy it. Good things had never lasted for her, not once, and there was a rich man in the valley below who'd sworn to enjoy watching them fall. The first blow came at the general store. Clara had ridden down alone. Ethan hadn't wanted her to, but they needed flour and salt and coffee, and he couldn't leave the stock, and she'd insisted she wasn't afraid to go into town in broad daylight. "I made my peace with that town over Tom's burns," she'd said. "Let them stare." But when she set her goods on the mercantile counter, the shopkeeper wouldn't take her money. "Can't sell to you," he said, not meeting her eye. "I beg your pardon. I said I can't sell to you, ma'am, nor your husband. Not flour, not salt, not sugar, not a horseshoe nail." His jaw was tight, and his ears were red with shame. "I'm sorry, I truly am. But I got a note at this bank, and the bank called it in this morning, and Mr. Crane made it real clear that any merchant in this valley who does business with the Walkers'll find his own note called next." He finally looked up miserable. "I got 6 children, Mrs. Walker. I can't lose the store. I'm sorry. God forgive me, but I can't." Clara stood very still. "He's starving us out," she said slowly. "That's what this is. He can't get the land by threat, so he's going to make it so we can't buy food." "I don't know nothing about his reasons, ma'am. I only know I can't sell to you." The shopkeeper leaned in, dropped his voice. "And it ain't just me. He's put the word out to every store in a day's ride. Bank owns paper on all of us." He swallowed. "You won't buy a sack of flour this side of the mountains, Mrs. Walker. Not while Crane wills it otherwise. I'm real sorry." Clara left her goods on the counter and walked out into the street with her heart pounding. And she understood with a cold sinking certainty that this was only the beginning. This was Crane showing them the edge of what he could do. This was the polite version. She rode back up the mountain and told Ethan, and she watched his face go hard and still. "I figured he'd try something like this," Ethan said. "Didn't think he'd move so fast. Can we manage without the stores? For a while." Ethan rubbed his jaw. "We've got the garden and the stock, and I can hunt, and there's fish in the creek. We won't starve this summer, but come winter." He stopped himself. "We'll worry on winter when it comes. Crane's counting on us getting scared and desperate. So we don't get scared, and we don't get desperate. We just endure, same as I've done 8 years. Only difference is now there's 2 of us, and 2 endures better than 1. And if that's not the end of it, if starving us out doesn't work and he tries something worse." Ethan looked at her a long moment. "Then I reckon we find out what worse means," he said quietly. "Together." Worse came 10 days later. It came in the night the way Ethan had feared from the start with fire. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and Ethan's voice roaring in the dark. "The barn! Clara, the barn's afire, get the buckets!" And then he was gone out the door in his nightshirt, and she was scrambling into a dress and running after him, and the whole yard was lit orange and terrible, and the barn where their winter feed was stored, where the milk cow and the mule and Ethan's good horse were stabled, was burning. "The animals!" Clara screamed. "I got 'em. I got the horse. Get the cow. She's on the near side." Clara ran into the smoke. She got the rope on the cow's halter and hauled the terrified animal out into the yard, coughing, her eyes streaming, and then she went back for the mule while Ethan fought the fire with buckets from the spring, and between the 2 of them they got every animal out alive, but the barn was gone. The barn and the winter hay and the feed and the tools, all of it gone up in an hour, and by the time the sun came up, there was nothing left but a smoking black skeleton, and the two of them standing in the ash exhausted and filthy and shaking. It wasn't an accident, Clara said. It wasn't a question. Ethan crouched down at the edge of the burned barn and picked something up out of the ash. He turned it over in his blackened hands. It was a whiskey bottle, scorched, cracked, but whole enough to read the label. "This is Crane's saloon brand," Ethan said flatly. "Filled with coal oil and thrown through the barn window. That's how they done it." He stood up. "Somebody rode up here in the dark and set my barn afire while we slept. They could have burned the house," Clara whispered, horror crawling up her spine. "With us in it." "No." Ethan's voice was cold and certain. "Crane don't want us dead. Not yet. Dead men and their widows don't sign land papers. He wants us broke and scared and desperate enough to sign. Burnin' the barn's a message. It says I can reach you. I can touch anything you got anytime I want, and there's not a thing you can do about it." He crushed the bottle in his fist and threw it into the ash. "It says next time it could be the house." Clara stood in the wreckage of everything they'd worked to build, and she felt the old fear rise up in her. The fear of a woman who'd been powerless her whole life against powerful men. And then standing there, she felt something rise up under the fear and burn it clean away. "No," she said. Ethan looked at her. "No," she said again louder, and there was iron in it now. "He does not get to do this. He does not get to burn our barn in the night and threaten our lives and drive us off this mountain like we're nothing, like we don't matter. I've spent my whole life being treated like I don't matter. Ethan, and I am done. Do you hear me? I am done." She turned to face him, ash on her face and fire in her eyes. "We are going to fight him. Not with guns he'd win that he's got more men. We're going to fight him the way he can't fight back. We're going to prove what he did. Prove it. How to who the sheriff's in his pocket. The judge is in his pocket. The whole valley owes him money." "Not the whole valley." Clara's mind was racing now, fast and clear. "The town's ashamed of itself," Ada said. "Half of them hate what they let Crane make them do. And there are courts above this valley, Ethan. Territorial courts. Federal marshals. Men Crane doesn't own." She grabbed his arm. "That bottle. That whiskey bottle. That's his brand. And a man who burns a barn in the night is a man who's done other things, worse things, and left other proof behind. If we can find it, if we can gather up every dirty thing Silas Crane has ever done in this valley and put it in front of a judge he doesn't own." "That's dangerous talk, Clara." But there was something new in Ethan's voice, something waking up. "Men have died in this valley asking fewer questions about Crane than that. Then we'll be careful." She was breathing hard. "But I am not running, Ethan. I've run my whole life. I ran from Kansas City. I've been running since I was a girl, and I've finally found a place I want to stay and a person I want to stay with, and I am not going to let Silas Crane run me off it." Her voice cracked. "This is my home. It's the only one I've ever had, and I will fight for it until there's nothing left of me to fight with." Ethan Walker looked at his wife, ash-streaked, fierce, trembling with fury and love, and something moved across his weathered face that Clara had never seen there before. "Hope, you know," he said slowly. "In 8 years it never once occurred to me to fight him. I just endured. Took what came and endured it, 'cause I figured that's all a monster's good for." He reached out and wiped a smear of ash from her cheek with his thumb, gentle as anything. "You've got more fight in you than I've had in near a decade, Clara Walker, and Lord help me, it's catchin'. Then you'll do it. You'll fight. I'll fight." He looked at the ruin of the barn, and then out over the mountain, and then back at her. "But not for the reason you think." "What reason, then?" "I spent 8 years not caring whether I lived or died on this mountain," Ethan said quietly. "Land didn't matter. Good name didn't matter. Nothing mattered 'cause there was nobody to matter for." He took both her hands in his. "And then you climbed up here with 40 cents and no place to go, and you cooked me a meal, and you called me a good man, and you stood up in the middle of that whole town and called Silas Crane a liar to his face for me." His voice went rough. So I'll fight Clara, not for the land, for the first thing in 8 years that's made me glad I'm still breathing. I'll fight for you. Clara's eyes filled. And I'll fight for you, she whispered. God help us both, Ethan. 2 thrown-away people against the richest man in the valley. 2's better than 1, Ethan said. You said it yourself. They started that very day. They cleaned the ash from the yard, and they sheltered the animals in a lean-to. Ethan threw together against the smokehouse, and then they sat down at the table and started making a list. Everyone in the valley who might have a grievance against Silas Crane and might be brave enough or angry enough to speak of it. Big Tom, Ethan said. Crane called his note the day the shop burned. Tried to buy the land cheap while Tom was flat on his back. Ada mentioned that. Clara said, writing it down in the careful hand she'd learned as a girl. She was furious. Said Crane came sniffing around before Tom's burns had even scabbed. The Hendersons down valley. Crane took their South 40 over a debt everybody knew was paid, said the receipt was a forgery, and the judge backed him. The judge Crane owns. That's the one. Ethan leaned forward. And there's more. There's been talk for years. Quiet talk the kind men only say when they're deep in their cups that Crane's been forging land deeds. Buying up water rights with papers nobody ever signed. Claiming land the territory ain't even surveyed yet. He tapped the table. If even half of it's true, and if we could get our hands on the proof, then it's not just us, Clara breathed. It's the whole valley. Every family he's cheated, every debt he's forged, if we can gather them all together. He'd hang, Ethan said flatly. A territorial court finds a man's been forging federal land deeds, that's a rope. Simple as that. They looked at each other across the table. It's dangerous, Clara said. It's real dangerous. He'll know what we're doing before we're halfway done. Someone will tell him, and when he knows he'll stop playing games and come for us for real. Ethan's face was grim. The barn was a message. If he learns we're gathering evidence to hang him, that won't be a message. That'll be a killin'. Clara set down the pencil. Are you afraid? She asked. Ethan considered it honestly the way he considered everything. Yes, he said. For the first time in 8 years I'm afraid. 'Cause for the first time in 8 years, I've got something to lose. He looked at her. You. I'm afraid of losing you, Clara. That's the only fear I've got left, and it's a big one. Then let's be careful, Clara said softly. Let's be smart. Let's gather what we can quiet as we can, and when we've got enough that no bought judge can wave it away, we take it over the mountain to the territorial court, and we hand Silas Crane to men he can't buy. She reached across the table and took his hand. And whatever happens, whatever he does to us, we do it together. We don't run, and we don't hide, and we don't leave each other alone. Not ever. That's the promise. Say it back to me. We don't leave each other alone, Ethan said. Not ever. Say my name when you say it. We don't leave each other alone, Clara Walker. His hand closed hard around hers. Not ever. Not while there's breath in me. And so it began. The quietest war ever waged in that valley, fought not with guns, but with words and witnesses and the slow gathering of proof by 2 people the whole world had thrown away. They rode down to Big Tom's first 3 days later, under the cover of bringing more burn dressings for his arm. And when Clara had changed the bandages and Ada had poured the coffee, Ethan laid it out plain what they meant to do and why, and the terrible risk of it. Big Tom listened from his sickbed, his splinted leg propped up his burned arm across his chest, and when Ethan finished, the big blacksmith was quiet, a long, long time. You're talking about taking down Silas Crane, Tom said finally. I am. You know how many men have tried? No. Neither do I, Tom said, 'cause they don't come back to tell it. He shifted painfully. Crane's owned this valley 12 years. He came in after the war with money nobody could account for, and he's been buying souls ever since. Mine included. God forgive me, he holds paper on this very shop. Tom's jaw tightened. But I'll tell you what, Ethan Walker. I laid in this bed the last 2 weeks with a crushed leg thinking on how I spent 8 years believing the worst about the one man who rode down a mountain to save my life. And I made myself a promise. He held out his good hand. "If ever I got the chance to make it right to stand with you, 'stead of hiding from you, I'd take it. No matter the cost. So yeah, I'm in. Whatever you need. Whatever it takes." Ethan took the offered hand, and Clara, watching the two big men clasp hands across the sickbed, felt the first true stirring of something she'd been afraid to name. Not hope exactly. Bigger than hope. The feeling of no longer being alone against the whole world. "There's others." Tom went on, warming to it now. "The Hendersons for one Crane robbed 'em blind, and old man Pruitt, whose well went dry the same month, Crane bought the water rights upstream. And—" Tom leaned forward, wincing, and dropped his voice, even though there was nobody to hear but the four of them. "And there's Marshal Deacon." "Deacon's the sheriff," Ethan said. "He's Crane's man." "The sheriff's Crane's man," Tom agreed. "But Deacon's a federal marshal, and he's been asking quiet questions in this valley for 6 months. Somebody up in the territory sent him. Somebody who don't like the smell of what Crane's been doing with those land deeds." Tom's eyes gleamed. "I heard it from a man who heard it from Deacon's own lips deep in drink. The marshal's building a case. He just don't have enough yet. He's got suspicion but no proof. No witnesses brave enough to talk." Clara and Ethan looked at each other. "But if a whole valley of witnesses came forward at once," Clara said slowly, "if we brought Deacon everything the Hendersons, Pruitt, your called note, our burned barn, the forged deeds, then a federal marshal who's already looking for a reason," Tom finished, "would have all the reason he could ever want." He sank back against his pillow, breathing hard from the excitement. It could work. Lord above, it could actually work. You'd be handing him a rope with Crane already in the noose. Ethan stood up slow. "Then that's what we do," he said. "We gather the valley, quiet, one family at a time. And when we've got enough, we go to Deacon, not the sheriff, the marshal, and we hand him Silas Crane." He put his hat on. "How long you reckon we've got before Crane figures out what we're up to?" Tom's face sobered. "Not long," he admitted. "Word travels in this valley faster'n any horse. Somebody'll see you calling on the Hendersons. Somebody'll notice you talking to Pruitt, and it'll get back to Crane inside a week, too, at the outside." He looked at them both, and the warning in his eyes was grave. "And when it does, you'd best be ready, 'cause a barn fire's the gentlest thing that man is capable of. Once he knows you're coming for his neck, he'll come for yours first, and he won't send a message next time. He'll send men, with guns." The ride back up the mountain was silent. It was Clara who finally spoke as the cabin came into view in the last gold light of the summer evening. "He's right," she said. "Crane's going to find out. Maybe not this week, but soon. And when he does, we'll be ready," Ethan said. How do we get ready for armed men, Ethan?" "You're one man. A good shot, I don't doubt, but one man. Don't." Ethan pulled the wagon into the yard and set the brake and sat there a moment before he answered. "You remember what you said?" he asked. "About two being better than one." "I remember." "Well." He turned to look at her. "By the time Crane comes, we won't be two. We'll be the Walkers and the blacksmith and the Hendersons and old Pruitt and every soul in that valley he's ever cheated or scared or robbed. Crane's whole power comes from folks being alone with their fear, each family too scared to stand up 'cause they think they're standing alone." His voice grew strong. "But we're gonna change that, Clara. One family at a time, we're gonna show 'em they ain't alone. And a valley that stands together." He shook his head. "A rich man with a dozen hired guns can't beat a valley that's finally stopped being afraid. He just can't. There ain't enough bullets." Clara looked at her husband. This man, the whole world had called a monster, who'd endured 8 years of exile in silence, now sitting in a wagon beside a burned barn, talking about raising a valley, and she felt her heart swell so full it hurt. "When did you get so brave?" she asked softly. "I ain't brave." Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his big hands sure at her waist. "I'm just a man who was dead inside for 8 years and got woke up." He set her down gentle. "And a man who's just come back to life fights different than a man who never lost it. He's got less to be afraid of. 'Cause he's already been to the bottom of the worst thing there is, and he survived it, and he knows he can survive it again." He held her eyes. "The only thing I'm afraid of now is losing the thing that woke me. And that's exactly why I'll fight so hard to keep it." "You understand." "I understand," Clara whispered. That night they lay side by side on top of the quilt, the way they had every night since Crane's first visit, a careful foot of space between them, hands sometimes finding each other in the dark. But this night, Clara didn't leave the foot of space. She moved across it. She turned on her side and laid her head on Ethan's chest over the slow, strong beat of his heart, and she felt him go still. That same shock, that same frozen stillness of a man handed something he'd stopped believing in. "Is this?" he started. "Just this," Clara said quietly. I still can't. There's still things I can't do, Ethan. Things that were done to me that I don't have the words for. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time." Her voice trembled. "But I can do this. I can lay my head on your chest and listen to your heart, and know that you're here, and that you're mine, and that you're not going anywhere. I can do this much." She pressed closer. "Is it enough? Can it be enough for now?" For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. Then slowly, carefully asking permission with every inch of the motion, he brought his arm up and around her, and he laid his big, rough hand against her back. Light as a falling leaf, and he held her. "Clara Walker," he said, and his voice was thick with everything he couldn't say. "You could give me nothing but this for the rest of my life, and it'd be more than I ever dreamed of having. You hear me? This is more than enough. This is everything." His hand moved on her back, slow and gentle. "Take all the time you need. All the time in the world. I told you the first night, and I meant it. I got nothing but time, and I'll spend every hour of it right here holding you exactly this much, and counting myself the luckiest man that ever lived." Clara closed her eyes against his chest, and for the first time in her entire life, she let herself be held by someone she trusted completely. And outside, down the mountain, in a fine house in a town full of frightened people, Silas Crane was already beginning to hear the whispers that the monster of the mountain had come down and saved a life, that his strange, fierce wife had called Crane a liar in the street, that the walkers were riding the valley calling on the very families Crane had cheated. And Silas Crane sat in his study late into the night, turning a glass of whiskey in his hand, and he smiled a smile that no one saw. "So the monster wants a fight," he murmured to the empty room. "After 8 years of taking it quiet. Well," he set down the glass. "Let's see how brave he stays when the fire comes for the house instead of the barn. Let's see how brave that little wife of his stays when she's got nowhere left to run." He rang a small silver bell, and a moment later, a man appeared in the doorway, hard-faced, gun on his hip, the kind of man money could always buy. "Get the others," Crane said. "All of them. It's time we paid the mountain a proper visit." And up on that mountain, holding his wife against the slow beat of his heart, Ethan Walker had no way of knowing that the war he'd finally chosen to fight had just that very night chosen to come to him. They came 4 nights later, and they came at the worst possible hour, that dead black stretch before dawn when a body sleeps deepest and a gun sounds loudest. But Ethan Walker had not survived 8 years alone on a mountain by sleeping deep. He woke to the wrong kind of quiet. The crickets gone silent, the horse in the lean-to shifting and blowing, and he was up off the quilt with his rifle in his hands before his mind had even named the danger. "Clara!" He shook her shoulder once hard. "Clara, wake up. They're here." She came awake fast, the way frightened people learn to. "How many?" "Don't know yet. Get down off the bed. Get in the corner by the hearth behind the woodbox, the wall's thickest there." He was already moving, snuffing the coals, so no light would show, checking the load in the rifle by feel. "And Clara, whatever happens out there, whatever you hear, you do not open that door. You understand me? Not for anything, not for anybody." "Ethan?" "Not for anybody, Clara. Say it back." "I won't open the door," she whispered. A voice came out of the dark yard, then smooth, unhurried, hateful. "Walker, Silas Crane. Ethan Walker. I know you're awake in there, a man like you always is." A pause. "Come on out and let's talk this over like reasonable men." Ethan crouched at the window, rifle ready, and said nothing. "Suit yourself," Crane called. "But I count 5 guns out here, Walker, and you've got one. I'd think hard about that math." Another pause, longer, crueler. "And I'd think harder about the fact that there's a woman in there with you. It'd be a shame, a real shame, if she got caught in the middle of something. Send her out first, why don't you? Before this turns ugly. Send her out and I give you my word, no harm comes to her. Whatever happens to you." The smile was audible in his voice. "That's more than fair. That's downright generous." "Don't you listen to him," Clara hissed from the corner. "Ethan, don't you dare. Quiet." Ethan breathed. He was counting, listening, placing the men in the dark by the small sounds they made: a boot on gravel there, a horse blowing there, the click of a hammer being thumbed back off to the left. 5, Crane had said, and Ethan made it 5 too, maybe 6 spread in a loose ring around the front of the cabin. And every last one of them was on the front side, where the door was, where the fight was expected, which meant the back, the side where the mountain fell away steep toward the tree line, was open. "Clara," Ethan whispered, backing toward her corner. "Listen to me. Listen close. There's 5 of them, and they're all out front. But the back window's clear. It drops onto the slope, and the slope runs down to the pines, and once you're in the pines, they'll never find you in the dark. No, you're gonna go out that window. No, Ethan. And you're gonna run down through the pines to the creek, and you're gonna follow the creek down to Big Tom's, and you're gonna wake him and tell him what's happening up here. I am not leaving you." Her whisper was fierce enough to cut. I told you I would never. We don't leave each other alone. You swore it back to me. And I meant it." Ethan gripped her shoulders hard in the dark. "Which is exactly why you've got to go. Don't you see it? Clara, if you stay, they've got us both in one box, and Crane wins tonight. He burns us out or shoots us down and it's over. But if you get to Tom, if Tom rides for Marshal Deacon, then even if they kill me tonight, Clara, even if I don't live to see the sun, Crane hangs for it. You'd be riding for the one thing that can beat him. You wouldn't be running away. You'd be running for the win." "I can't." Her voice broke. "Ethan, I can't leave you to die. I can't. Don't ask me to. Please don't ask me." "Clara Walker." He took her face in his big hands. 4 months ago, I was ready to die on this mountain and glad of it. You gave me a reason to live. Now I'm asking you to trust me with the thing I just learned how to want. Trust me to fight for it. Trust me to be alive when you get back." His thumbs wiped the tears from her cheeks in the dark. "But if I ain't, if the worst comes, then you make sure that man hangs. You make my dyin' mean something. That's how you keep the promise. Not by dyin' beside me, by livin' to finish it." For one terrible second, she didn't move. Then Crane's voice came again from the yard, closer now and harder. "Time's up, Walker. Last chance, send the woman out or we come in and take you both, and then I can't answer for what my boys do to her." And that was the thing that broke her. Not fear for herself. The threat to her from Crane's own mouth of what would happen if she stayed. "You come find me," Clara said, fierce and shaking her hands fisted in his shirt. "You hear me, Ethan Walker? You don't die. You fight and you live and you come find me at Tom's. Swear it. Swear it to me right now. I swear it. Say my name. I'll come find you, Clara. I swear it on everything I've got left. Now go. Go." He got the back window open with barely a sound, and he lifted her through it, and for one last second, her hand clung to his. And then she let go, and dropped onto the dark slope, and was gone into the pines like a ghost. And Ethan Walker turned back to the front of his cabin, alone with 1 rifle and 5 men in the yard, and for the first time in 8 years, he was not fighting to die. He was fighting to keep a promise. "All right, Crane," he called out, and his voice was steady as stone. "You want to talk? Let's talk. Come on up to the porch where I can see you, just you, and I'll come out and we'll settle this." "You think I'm a fool?" Crane laughed. "You'll shoot me the second I step into the light." "I give you my word I won't." "Your word." Crane's contempt was total. "The word of a monster. Boys, burn him out, same as the barn. Coal oil on the walls, and when he runs, drop him. And that was Ethan's answer, the one he'd been waiting for. Because a man who gives that order has just told every one of his hired guns to lay down their rifles and pick up a bottle and a match. And a man with a bottle and a match in his hands is a man who is not in that moment pointing a gun. Ethan came out the front door, low and fast, not standing to fight, but rolling off the porch into the black at the base of it, and the first shot he fired took the nearest man, the one already swinging his arm back to throw the coal oil clean off his feet, and the bottle shattered on the ground, and the coal oil did not reach the wall. Then it was chaos. Muzzle flashes tore the dark. Ethan was moving, always moving, using the woodpile and the well and the corner of the porch, and 8 years of solitude had made him a better shot in the dark than any town-bred hired gun would ever be. He heard a man scream and go down. He heard Crane shouting orders that nobody was following anymore, because it's one thing to burn a sleeping man's barn, and another thing entirely to trade fire with a mountain man who shoots like the devil owes him money. "He's just one man," Crane was screaming. "One man! Rush him! Rush him!" But they didn't rush him. They'd signed on to frighten a widower and torch a cabin not to die in a black yard on a mountain. And one by one, Ethan heard them breaking a man scrambling for his horse, another crawling for the tree line, and Ethan let them go because he wasn't fighting to kill men who'd lost their stomach for it. He was fighting to survive till dawn. And then a shot came from a direction he hadn't covered, and it caught him. High on the left side below the shoulder, a hammer blow that spun him half around and put him down on one knee in the dirt, and the rifle nearly leaped from his hands. "There," Crane crowed. "I got him. I got the monster. Finish it, boys, finish it now." Ethan knelt in the dark, his left arm gone numb and useless, blood soaking hot down his side, and he understood with a cold clarity that this was the moment. This was where 8 years of not caring whether he lived met 4 months of learning that he did. Clara. He got the rifle up one-handed. He couldn't feel his left arm, but he could still work the lever with his right brace, the stock against his hip, and he did, and he fired at the muzzle flash where Crane's voice had been. Not to kill the banker, he was too far, and Ethan too hurt for that, but to buy a breath to make them keep their heads down one more second. And into that second came a sound that changed everything. Hoofbeats, many of them. Coming up the mountain road hard and fast, and a voice roaring through the dark that Ethan knew Big Tom, who could not walk without a crutch bellowing from the back of a horse. "Walker, we're comin', hold on. Walker, we're comin'." And then the yard was full of riders and torches and shouting men, and Ethan, kneeling in his own blood, saw the impossible. Half the valley had come up his mountain in the dead of night. Big Tom lashed to his saddle so his crushed leg wouldn't fail him a shotgun across the horn. Old Man Pruitt. The Henderson boys, 3 of them with their father's rifles. The saloon keeper's son who'd fetched the first bucket of water for Tom's burns. A dozen men and more, the very people Crane had spent 12 years teaching to be afraid, and they had come up the mountain in the dark for the monster. And riding at the front of them, small and fierce and terrible, her hair loose and her dress torn from the pines and a lantern held high over her head, Clara. "Ethan!" she screamed, and he heard the whole world in it. "I'm here," he called back, and his voice was weaker than he wanted. "I'm here, Clara. I'm hit, but I'm here." Silas Crane in the sudden torchlight understood in an instant that everything had turned. His 5 hired guns were down or fled. The valley he'd owned by fear had risen up in the dark and come for him. And he did the only thing a man like Silas Crane ever does when the fear stops working. He grabbed the nearest weapon he could reach, and it was Clara dragged half off her horse as she flung herself down toward Ethan Crane's arm, locking around her throat. His pistol jammed hard against her temple. "Back!" Crane shrieked. "Everybody back, or I blow her head off her shoulders, I mean it. I'll do it." Everything stopped. The riders froze. The torches guttered. And Ethan Walker, on his knees in the dirt with a bullet in him and his rifle empty, looked up into the face of the man holding a gun to his wife's head and felt a calm come over him, colder and deeper than anything he'd ever known. "Crane," Ethan said quietly. "Let her go." "Or what?" Crane was breathing hard, wild-eyed, all his smooth gone. "Or what, Walker? You're on your knees. You're shot. Your gun's empty. You think I can't count shots? You've got nothing." He tightened his arm around Clara's throat until she gasped. "Now here's how this goes. All of you. You're going to drop your guns and stand aside, and I'm going to ride out of here with this woman, and if any man follows, I put a bullet in her. And once I'm clear of the valley, I'll let her go, and we'll all forget this night ever." "He's lying," Clara choked out. "Ethan, he'll kill me either way. Don't you dare give him—" "Shut up!" Crane wrenched her tighter. "Don't you dare let him win." Clara forced out, her eyes locked on her husband's. "Even if it costs me, don't you let that man—" "I said, shut up!" And in the half-second, Crane's attention snapped to the woman in his arms in that one fracture of focus. Clara Bennett Walker, who had spent her whole life being taken from and had finally learned to fight, did the only thing she could. She dropped. She let every muscle in her body go slack at once, dead weight, so that instead of holding a hostage upright, Crane was suddenly wrestling a falling body. His gun arm dragged down and away from her head, and she screamed a single word, "Now!" And Ethan Walker, who could not feel his left arm, who was empty of bullets and half empty of blood, did not reach for a gun. He reached for the throwing knife in his boot, the one he'd carried skinning game on that mountain for 8 lonesome years, and with his good right hand from his knees, he threw it the way a man throws the last thing he has at the only thing that matters. It took Silas Crane through the shoulder of his gun arm. The pistol fired into the dirt. Crane screamed and staggered, and Clara tore free of his loosened grip and scrambled away across the yard on her hands and knees, and then the valley was on him, Big Tom off his horse and onto the banker. Despite his crushed leg, the Henderson boys' old Pruitt, a dozen furious men who'd been afraid of this one man for 12 long years, and were done being afraid, and they had him down and disarmed and pinned in the dirt of Ethan Walker's yard before Crane could draw another breath to threaten with. But Ethan didn't see the end of it, because Clara reached him. She reached him where he knelt swaying in the dark, and she got her arms around him just as the last of his strength gave out, and he sagged against her, and the two of them went down together into the dirt with her, holding him up as best she could. "Ethan! Ethan, look at me! Look at me!" Her hands were on his face, his shoulder coming away black with blood in the torchlight. "You're bleeding! Oh God, you're bleeding so much, Tom! Tom, he's hit! He's hit bad! I need help!" "Clara!" Ethan's voice was going thin. "Clara, you got away from him. You're safe. I'm safe. I'm safe. You saved me. Now you stay with me, Ethan. You stay awake, you hear me? You swore you'd live. You swore it. You come find me at Tom's, that's what you said. Well, I'm right here, so you don't get to die. Do you understand me?" She was pressing her own torn hem against the wound with all her strength, sobbing and furious at once. "You do not get to die and leave me alone. Not after all this. Not now. I forbid it. Do you hear me, Ethan Walker? I forbid it." Ethan looked up at her face above him in the wild torchlight. The woman who'd climbed up his mountain with 40 cents, who'd cooked him biscuits when he'd forgotten what kindness tasted like, who'd stood up in a whole town and called him a good man, who'd just gone slack in a killer's arms and screamed now, so a broken cowboy could save her life. And Ethan Walker, who had spent 8 years learning he could survive anything, finally understood the one thing he'd been too dead to know before. Surviving wasn't the same as living. And he wanted for the first time in 8 long years so badly to live. "I ain't going anywhere," he whispered. "I told you, Clara. I got nothing in this whole world but time, and I aim to spend every hour of it." His eyes fluttered, "With you." And then he went under, and the last thing he heard was Clara screaming his name. They worked over him that night, the way Clara had worked over Big Tom. Except now, it was her own husband under her bloody hands, and the roles were reversed. And it was Ada Walker who'd come up the mountain, with the others holding the lantern steady, while Clara dug for the bullet. "It's lodged against the bone," Clara said through her teeth, her whole body shaking. forcing her voice into the flat calm of the kitchen because it was the only thing keeping her from flying apart. It didn't hit the lung, thank God, his breathing's clear. But it's deep, and if I don't get it out clean, he'll fester, and if he festers... She couldn't finish it. Ada, I need you to hold him, whatever he does, whatever he says. You hold him down and you don't let go. I've got him, child, Ada said. You do what you have to do. And Clara Walker set her jaw, and she went into the wound after the bullet that had nearly taken her husband from her. And Ethan came screaming up out of his faint at the pain of it, and it took Ada and Big Tom both to hold him. And Clara did not stop, did not falter, did not let one tear fall until her fingers closed on the flattened lead, and she drew it out and dropped it ringing into the basin. And then, and only then, she pressed the wound closed and packed it and bound it. And she laid her forehead against Ethan's heaving chest, and she wept like she had never wept in her life. Miss. Big Tom's voice was gentle over her. Miss Clara, you did it. You got it out clean. Look, the bleedin's already slowin'. You saved him, same as you saved me. You saved him. He saved me first. Clara sobbed into her husband's chest. He threw that knife, he was dying, and he threw that knife to save me. He'd have died to save me, Tom. I know it, Tom said softly. The whole valley saw it. That man'd have walked into hell tonight before he let Crane take you. Ain't a soul on this mountain'll ever call him a monster again. Not after tonight. Ethan's hand found hers weak and searching. Clara, he breathed. I'm here. I'm right here. Did we... He swallowed. Crane, did we... We got him. Clara lifted her head, and through her tears there was something fierce and bright and triumphant. The valley's got him tied up in the yard right now, Ethan. Tied up like a hog for market. Old man Pruitt's sitting on him with a shotgun and daring him to twitch. She laughed a wet, broken, disbelieving laugh. They came, Ethan. The whole valley came up the mountain in the dark. For you. For us. Every family Crane ever cheated, they all came. She pressed his hand to her cheek. You were right. You were right about everything. A valley that stops being afraid he couldn't beat it. There weren't enough bullets. Ethan closed his eyes. 8 years, he whispered. 8 years I thought they hated me. They were ashamed of themselves, Clara said. There's a difference. And tonight they finally got to make it right. She smoothed the hair back from his gray face. You gave them that, Ethan. You gave a whole valley the chance to stop being cowards. That's who you are. That's who you've always been. Marshal Deacon arrived at first light. Big Tom's boy had ridden through the night to fetch him from the county seat, and the federal marshal came up the mountain at a gallop with 2 deputies behind him. And what he found in Ethan Walker's yard was a case handed to him complete. Silas Crane wounded and bound. 5 hired guns dead, or captured or fled. A burned barn with a coal oil bottle bearing Crane's own saloon brand. And a valley full of witnesses who for the first time in 12 years were no longer afraid to talk. Well, Deacon said, looking down at Crane trussed in the dirt. Silas Crane, I've been trying to get something to stick on you for 6 months. Water rights that never got bought. Deeds signed by dead men. Debts that were paid and called anyway. He crouched down. And now here you are, caught in the act of attempted murder with half the county lined up to testify. I do believe, Mr. Crane, that your reign in this valley is at an end. They're lying, Crane spat. All of them. It's a conspiracy. Deacon Walker's a known murderer. Ask anyone. Ask the whole town. Funny thing, Deacon stood back up. I did ask the whole town. On my way up here. Woke half of them to do it. And you know what I heard, Crane? His voice hardened. I heard the truth about a blizzard 8 years back. And a doctor who wouldn't ride. And a man you spent near a decade paying folks to call a monster so nobody'd look too close at what you were doing to this valley. He nodded to his deputies. Take him, and send for the circuit judge, the real one from the territory. Not that bought sack of a magistrate he keeps in his pocket down there. He looked at the exhausted, blood-streaked faces all around the yard. This valley's about to get its first honest trial in a good long while. And that was how the reign of Silas Crane ended. Not with Ethan Walker's gun, but with the whole valley's voice raised together at last. But Ethan didn't hear the marshal's words. He was inside on the bed, drifting in and out of a fevered sleep, with Clara's hand in his. Fighting a battle no gun could help him win the fight against the fever that a deep wound brings the fight to hold on. And for 3 days and 3 nights, Clara Walker did not leave his side. She changed his dressings when they soaked through. She held water to his lips when he could take it, and cool cloths to his brow when the fever climbed. She listened to him rave in his sleep about Sarah, about the blizzard, about a doctor who wouldn't come, and she held him through it. And when he cried out in the dark, she answered every time. "I'm here, Ethan. I'm right here. You're not alone. Never again. I'm right here." On the second night, the fever climbed so high, she was sure she was losing him. And Ada found her on her knees by the bed, praying with a ferocity that frightened them both. "Don't you take him?" Clara was whispering, her hands clasped white. "You hear me? You took everyone else. You took every single person who ever mattered to me. You can't have him. You gave him to me, and I won't give him back. I won't. Take the land, take the cabin, take anything else, but you leave me this one man. You leave me this one." She pressed her clasped hands to her lips. "Please, he's all I've got. He's the only home I've ever had. Please don't take my home." And whether it was the prayer, or Clara's stubborn hands, or the strength in Ethan Walker that 8 hard years had forged, on the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Clara woke slumped in the chair by the bed where she'd fallen asleep for the first time in 3 days. And she woke because someone was touching her hair. Weakly, clumsily, but touching it. Her eyes flew open. Ethan was awake. Pale as death, thin and hollow-eyed and weak as a newborn, but awake and clear-eyed and looking at her, and his big hand was resting against her hair like he wasn't sure she was real. "Ethan," she breathed. "You're still here," he whispered. His voice was a ruin, barely a thread. 3 days. Every time I came up out of it, you were still here. Of course I'm still here." She caught his hand and pressed it to her face, laughing and crying all at once. "Where else would I be? You're my home, Ethan Walker, and a body doesn't leave home." Ethan looked at her for a long, long moment, and then he said the words she would carry with her for the rest of her days. "You know," he rasped. "When Sarah died, when I lost her, I told myself I'd never care about another living soul again. Not ever. 'Cause Karen was just a door you left open for the world to walk through and break you." His fingers curled weakly around hers. 8 years I kept that door shut. 8 years. And then you climbed up my mountain and you didn't ask permission. You just walked right in through a door I thought I'd nailed shut, and you filled up this whole empty house and this whole empty man. His eyes filled. "I fought Crane 'cause of you, Clara. I threw that knife 'cause of you. I clawed my way back from that fever 'cause of you. Every good thing left in me, you woke it. You're the reason I'm still breathing. Not just the last 3 days. These last 4 months." He drew a shaking breath. "So I got something to say to you, and I want to say it while I've got the strength, in case the good Lord changes his mind about letting me stay." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't talk about, I love you, Clara Walker." The words fell into the quiet room and stopped her breath entirely. "I know that wasn't the deal," Ethan went on, hoarse and urgent, holding her eyes. "I know I promised you nothing but my name and a shield against the town, and I know there's things you still can't do, things that were done to you, that I'd kill 100 Cranes to undo. And I ain't asking you for one thing more than you can give. I never will. But I couldn't lie here another minute letting you think this was still just a paper and a shield." His voice broke clean through. "I love you. I have loved you since the day you cooked me biscuits and gravy and called me a man instead of a monster. And whatever time I've got left on this earth, 3 days or 30 years, I want to spend every hour of it loving you. That's all. That's everything. I just needed you to know it, in case I don't get another chance to say it." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak at all. And then she rose up out of the chair and she leaned over her wounded husband. And she did something she had not been able to do in all the long weeks of their strange marriage. The thing that fear and old wounds had made impossible. She kissed him. Gentle and slow, and with her whole heart, a kiss. She gave freely. A kiss no one had taken from her, the first thing in her whole life she had ever chosen to give a man simply because she wanted to. And when she drew back, both their faces were wet. "I love you too, Ethan Walker," she whispered against his lips. "I think I have since that first night when you put down the lamp and took off your hat and slept on the floor so I wouldn't be afraid. I just didn't have the words for it yet. I didn't believe a thing like this was real." She pressed her forehead to his. "But it's real. You're real. And I'm not afraid anymore. Not of you, not of anything. Because I finally know what it feels like to be loved by a good man, and it feels like coming home." Outside, the summer sun was climbing over the mountain, and the valley below was waking to its first free morning in 12 years, and a federal marshal was writing up the case that would send Silas Crane to the territorial gallows. But inside the little cabin, none of that was the miracle. The miracle was a broken woman and a hollowed-out man, both of them thrown away by the world, holding on to each other in the morning light, alive together, and no longer either one of them alone. The trial came in the last hot week of that summer, and the whole valley emptied itself into the county seat to see it. Ethan was well enough to travel by then, barely. 3 weeks of Clara's nursing had brought him back from the edge, but he was still thin and slow. His left arm strapped tight across his chest, and he leaned on her going into the courthouse in a way that would have shamed the old Ethan Walker to his bones. But he didn't fight it now. He'd learned to lean. That was one of the things she'd taught him in the long, fevered nights, that leaning on someone who loved you wasn't weakness. It was just the other half of holding them up. "You don't have to testify," Clara said quietly at the courthouse steps, straightening his collar, with hands that had grown so familiar with his body over those weeks. "Deacon says he's got enough without you. You could rest. You've bled enough for this valley, Ethan. I'm testifying." His jaw set in the way she knew meant there'd be no moving him. 8 years that man made a whole valley call me a monster, Clara. 8 years. I'm gonna stand up in front of a judge he doesn't own, and I'm gonna tell the truth, and I'm gonna watch his face while I do it. He looked down at her. "I need to. You understand, not for revenge, for the record. So there's one place in this world where the truth about Ethan Walker got said out loud and written down." Clara understood. She'd spent her own life having the truth about her twisted by people with more power than she had. She knew exactly what it was worth to finally get to say it plain. "Then I'll be right there," she said. "In the front row, where you can see me." "Where I can see you," he agreed. "Same as I told Crane to do. It come through me to get to you. Only now, it's the other way. You be where I can see you, and I'll get through anything." The territorial judge was a lean, gray, unsmiling man named Harmon, sent up from the capital, and he had no debts to Silas Crane and no fear of him, and it showed in every word he spoke. He ran that courtroom like a man cleaning out a wound thoroughly, without flinching, and without any patience for the poison that had festered in it. And one by one the valley came forward to testify. The Hendersons told how Crane had stolen their South 40 on a forged debt. Old man Pruitt told how his well had gone dry the very month Crane bought the water rights upstream with a deed no honest surveyor had ever signed. The shopkeeper, pale and shaking, but there standing up at last, told how Crane had ordered every merchant in the valley to starve the Walkers out, and how he'd threatened their notes to make them do it. And Marshal Deacon laid out 6 months of patient work, the forged land deeds, the bribed magistrate, the water rights bought from men who'd been dead for years. Then Big Tom took the stand carried to it. His leg still splinted, and told the courtroom about a blizzard 8 years back, and a doctor who wouldn't ride, and a town that had needed a monster so badly it had built one out of the only decent man among them. "I stood at my own window that night," Tom said, his big voice thick. "I watched Ethan Walker beg on his knees in the street for a doctor to save his dying wife. And I did nothing. I let him ride back up that mountain alone. And then, God forgive me, I spent 8 years letting folks call him a killer, 'cause it was easier than looking at what I'd done." He turned in the witness chair and looked straight at Ethan. "There ain't words enough for how sorry I am. But that man came down my mountain when my shop burned and saved my life. And when Crane's guns came for him in the night, that man sent his own wife to safety and stood alone against 5 men, rather than let harm come to a single soul in this valley. Tom's voice cracked. You want to know who the monster is? Your Honor, look at the man in them chains. And you want to know who the truest Christian in this whole valley is? He's sitting right there with his arm in a sling, and it took me 8 years of shame to see it. The courtroom was dead silent, and then it was Ethan's turn. He rose slow, and Clara half rose with him before she caught herself, and he crossed to the witness chair with his careful wounded gait, and he sat, and he looked out over the packed courtroom, over the faces of the whole valley that had wronged him, and the marshal who'd freed him, and the judge who'd hear him and his wife in the front row with her eyes locked on his, and he told the truth. All of it. Sarah and the blizzard and the doctor. The 8 years of exile. Crane's visits and the threats and the fire in the night. And when the prosecutor asked him to describe the night the guns came, Ethan told it plain and unflinching, right up to the moment Crane had put a pistol to Clara's head. He had a gun to my wife's head, Ethan said, and his voice was steady, but his good hand had closed into a fist on the rail. And he offered to let her live if she'd come away with him, and she... He stopped. He looked at Clara. She went slack in his arms, Your Honor, on purpose. Made herself dead weight so his gun had come off her head, and she screamed at me to take the shot even if it cost her life. That's the bravest thing I ever saw a human being do. And it's why I'm alive to sit here. My wife saved my life by being willing to lose hers. His jaw worked. So when this valley wonders who the strong one is in the Walker house, it ain't me. It never was. Clara was crying openly now, and she wasn't the only one. Silas Crane's lawyer, a slick territorial man, expensive, brought in special tried to break Ethan on cross-examination. Tried to paint him as a violent man, a man too quick with a gun and a knife, a man who'd killed Crane's hired hands in the yard. You threw a knife into my client's shoulder, did you not, Mr. Walker? I did. A man you claim was holding a gun to your wife. A man who was holding a gun to my wife. And how do we know, the lawyer purred, that it was truly self-defense? How do we know you didn't provoke this whole confrontation? A man with your reputation. My reputation. Ethan's voice went very quiet, and something in it made the whole courtroom lean in. You want to talk about my reputation, mister? My reputation was built by the man you're defending. Every ugly word ever said about Ethan Walker Silas Crane paid for or started. So you'll forgive me if I don't set much store by it. He leaned forward, and his gray eyes were hard as flint. You asked how you know it was self-defense. Here's how. Ask yourself why a dozen families rode up my mountain in the dead of night to stand with me against Crane's guns. Ask yourself why a whole valley that spent 8 years calling me a monster came to save my life the second they got the chance. People don't ride into gunfire for a monster, mister. They rode for me because they finally saw the truth, and you can't cross-examine a whole valley's change of heart. The lawyer had no answer for that. He sat down, and Judge Harmon from the bench said dryly, No, I don't believe he can. You may step down, Mr. Walker. The verdict took the jury less than an hour. Guilty. On every count. Attempted murder, arson, forgery of federal land deeds, bribery of a public official, and a dozen lesser crimes besides. And Judge Harmon, when he passed sentence, did not spare Silas Crane 1 ounce of the weight the law allowed. You didn't just cheat these people, Mr. Crane, the judge said. You taught a whole valley to be afraid of each other. You took a decent man and made a monster of him in the public mind, so no one would look too closely at the real monster among them. That is perhaps the gravest thing a man can do to a community to poison the trust that holds it together. He set down his gavel. The land you stole is to be returned. The debts you forged are void, and you, sir, will be held for the territorial court on the capital charges, where I have every confidence you will answer for all of it at the end of a rope. The gavel came down. This court is adjourned, and that was the end of Silas Crane. They led him out in chains, and he passed close by the Walkers on his way, and for one moment his eyes met Ethan's, and Clara saw the banker's mouth open to say something cruel, some last poison. But Ethan spoke first. I ain't got any hate left for you, Crane, Ethan said quietly. I used all mine up on the years you cost me. But I'll tell you what I have got. I've got a wife and a valley full of friends and a home I fought for and kept. And you're gonna hang with none of that." He shook his head slow. "You had all the money in this valley, and you die poorer than any man in it. Reckon that's justice enough. I don't need to add to it." And he turned his back on Silas Crane, and he offered Clara his good arm, and the two of them walked out of that courthouse into the summer sun together, and they did not look back. The valley was different after that. Clara felt it the first time they rode into Ashford Creek in the weeks that followed, the same town that had watched her climb off a stage with 40 cents and warned her away from the monster's mountain. Only now, the mercantile women who'd laughed at her came out to the boardwalk with their eyes down and their voices soft. "Mrs. Walker." One of them said the very woman who told her everything Ethan Walker ever loved is dead. "Mrs. Walker, we owe you an apology. Both of you. What we said when you first come to town. What we let ourselves believe all these years." The woman twisted her apron in her hands. "There's no excuse for it. But I wanted to say it to your face. We were wrong. We were cowards, and we were wrong, and your husband's a better soul than any of us." Clara looked at the woman a long moment, and she thought about all the years she'd spent being judged and thrown away and looked at like a problem, and she found to her own surprise that she had no cruelty in her to give back. "Thank you for saying it," Clara said simply. "It takes a bigger person to admit they were wrong than to have been right in the first place. Ethan taught me that." She managed a small smile. "You come up the mountain sometime. I'll put on coffee. It's past time this valley stopped being strangers to each other." And the woman's eyes filled, and she nodded, unable to speak. And Clara understood that she'd just done the thing Ethan did, the thing that had confused her so that first day when he'd set the fleeing preacher's forgotten Bible careful on the mantel to return it. A man's kindness ain't a thing you spend only on folks who earned it. She'd finally learned it clean through to the bone. The mercantile sold to them now, of course. Everyone did. The shopkeeper wouldn't take Ethan's money the first visit. "It's on the house, Mr. Walker, all of it, and it don't near cover what I owe you." And Ethan made him take it anyway because that was Ethan. The valley rebuilt their barn too. Came up the mountain one Saturday, 30 strong with lumber and tools, and their wives bearing food, and they raised a new barn in a single day, where the burned one had stood better than the old one, bigger with a stone foundation. Crane's coal oil could never touch. And when it was done, they all sat down together in the yard to eat the whole valley and the two people it had once cast out, and there was laughter on that mountain for the first time in 8 years. Clara watched Ethan. That day, watched him stand awkward and uncertain at the edge of his own gathering. This man who'd forgotten how to be among people, and she watched Big Tom draw him in, and old Pruitt clap him on his good shoulder, and the Henderson boys ask his advice about their stock like his word was worth having. And she watched Ethan Walker slowly over the course of that long golden afternoon remember how to be a man among men, how to laugh at a joke, how to belong somewhere. That night, after the last wagon had rattled down the mountain, she found him standing alone in the yard, looking at the new barn in the moonlight. "You all right?" she asked, coming up beside him. "I don't rightly know what I am," Ethan said. "Ain't got a word for it." He was quiet a moment. 8 years I stood in this yard and there wasn't a soul on this earth who'd have crossed the street for me. And today, 30 people built me a barn and ate at my table and called me friend." He shook his head slow. How do you even, Clara, I don't know how to hold something this big. I spent so long with nothing. I don't know how to have this." Clara slipped her hand into his. "You hold it the same way you held me," she said softly. "One day at a time. Careful at first. Not quite believing it's real. And then one morning you wake up and it's just yours. And you can't imagine you ever lived without it." She leaned her head against his good shoulder. "That's how I learned it. From you. You taught me how to have a home, Ethan. Now the valley's teaching you the same thing. It's only fair." He turned and looked down at her, and in the moonlight she saw his eyes were wet. "You did this," he said. "All of it. The valley, the trial, the barn it started with you climbing up my mountain and refusing to be scared of me. None of it happens without you, Clara. And none of it happens without you being worth standing up for, she answered. It goes both ways. That's what a marriage is, I think. I'm only just learning. She squeezed his hand. We built this together. Two people the world threw away, and look what we made out of what was left of us. But there was one more test still waiting for them, and it came as the summer began to turn toward fall in a form Clara had not expected. Not a threat this time, but an offer. It arrived by letter, carried up the mountain by Big Tom's boy, and it bore the seal of the territorial capital. Clara read it twice before she understood it, and then she sat down hard at the table, and when Ethan came in from the new barn, she handed it to him without a word. What is it? He couldn't read it, never had learned his letters past the barest necessity, a fact he'd confessed to her weeks ago with a shame she'd gently talked him out of. Read it to me. What's it say? It's from the court, Clara said slowly. From the territory. Ethan, because Crane's land is forfeit, and because you and I were the ones who brought him down, they're offering us his holdings, the bank, the mercantile, the good bottom land in the valley. All of it. Practically for nothing. She looked up at him dazed. Ethan, we could be rich. We could be the richest people in the whole valley. We could move down out of this cabin into Crane's fine house and never want for anything again. Ethan stood very still. Rich, he repeated. A fine house, good land, money in the bank. Clara heard her own voice and hated how small it sounded. A life without struggling, without the hard winters up here, without any of it ever again. She swallowed. It's everything I never had, Ethan. Everything I ran from Kansas City dreaming about. A soft, safe, easy life. It's right here in this letter. And she watched her husband's face, and she braced herself because she'd learned long ago that this was the moment men showed you who they truly were, the moment money was set on the table. Ethan was quiet for a long, long time. Then he pulled out the chair across from her, and he sat down, and he took her hand across the table with his good one. Clara, he said gently, I'm going to ask you something, and I want the true answer, not the answer you think I want to hear. He held her eyes. When you picture that fine house down in the valley, Crane's house, with his money and his good land and his soft, easy life, when you picture yourself living in it, are you happy? Clara opened her mouth to say yes, and found she couldn't, because it wasn't true. No, she whispered, and the word surprised her even as she said it. No, I'm not. I don't know why, but I'm not. I'll tell you why. Ethan's thumb moved slow over her knuckles. 'Cause that house was built on 12 years of fear and stealin' and forged papers. Every board of it, every dollar in that bank come from a family Crane cheated or a man he broke. You'd never sleep sound in it, Clara. Neither would I. It's a poisoned thing. It's got Crane's rot in the very foundation. He shook his head. And more'n that, this cabin. He looked around the little room, the room where she'd cooked him his first meal, where he'd slept on the floor, where they'd lain side by side learning each other by inches. This cabin ain't much. It's small and it's cold in winter, and I know it's less than you dreamed of. But every board of it is honest. I built the far wall myself the second summer. You made it a home with your own two hands. We fought for it and we bled for it and we kept it. His voice went rough. I'd rather be poor in an honest home I built with the woman I love than rich in a fine house built on other folks' misery. But, he squeezed her hand, it ain't just my choice, it's ours now. So you tell me, true Clara, what do you want? And whatever it is, that's what we'll do. If you want that fine house, I'll swallow every word I just said, and I'll live in it and be glad, long as you're beside me. I mean that. And Clara Walker looked at her husband, this man who had just been offered everything she'd once believed she wanted, and had set it aside without a second thought. Not out of pride, but out of a bone-deep knowing of what actually mattered. And she understood that he had just given her the truest gift of her whole life. He'd given her the choice, freely, with no hand on the scale. The way he'd given her every choice since the first night when he'd set down the lamp and taken off his hat and slept on the floor. Give me the letter, she said. He handed it to her. And Clara Bennett Walker, who had spent her whole life having other people decide her fate, took the offer of a fortune, and she tore it clean in half, and then in half again, and she dropped the pieces into the cold hearth. "We'll write them back," she said, "and tell them to give Crane's land back to the families he stole it from. The Hendersons' 40, Pruitt's water rights, all of it back to the people it was taken from. We don't want it. We've already got everything we need." Ethan stared at her. "Clara, I mean it." Her voice was steady and certain, and full of a joy she'd never known before. "I spent 26 years chasing a soft, easy life, Ethan, because I thought that's what would finally make me safe, finally make me matter. And then I climbed up a mountain to a cold little cabin, and a man everyone called a monster, and I found out I was wrong about everything. Safe isn't a fine house. Safe isn't money in the bank." She came around the table and took his face in her hands. "Safe is you. It's this. It's a man who sleeps on the floor, so I won't be scared, and throws a knife dying to save me, and hands me the choice of a fortune with no thumb on the scale. That's what I was really looking for my whole life. I just had the shape of it wrong. I thought it was a house. It was always a person." She kissed his forehead. "I don't want Crane's fine house, Ethan. I want to grow old in the cabin you built with your own hands. I want to freeze into the winters with you, and sweat in the summers with you, and bury us both up here someday side by side. That's the life I want. This one, ours." Ethan Walker pulled his wife into his good arm and held her against him, and for a long moment neither of them could speak. "You know," he finally managed, his voice thick, "the first night you come up here, I told you I couldn't offer you nothing but my name and a shield against the town. Remember that?" "I remember. I was wrong." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Turns out I had one more thing to give you, and it was the only thing that ever mattered. I could give you a place to belong, a home. Not the cabin me. I could be your home, Clara, and you could be mine. And two people who never had a home their whole lives could make one out of each other." His arm tightened. "That's the richest thing there is. Crane died with all the money in the valley and none of it. And we've got nothing but this cold little cabin and each other, and we're the wealthiest souls in the whole territory. Ain't that something?" Clara laughed against his chest, wet and joyful. "It's the truest thing I ever heard," she said. "And you're the one who taught it to me. A man everyone called heartless turned out to have the biggest heart in the whole valley. They just needed the eyes to see it. And I'm so grateful, Ethan. I'm so grateful I was the one who got to see it first." Outside, the summer was fading, and the first cool breath of autumn was moving down the mountain, and the valley below was healing family by family from 12 years of one man's poison. And in a small, honest cabin that two thrown-away people had made into the only true home either of them had ever known, Ethan Walker held his wife in the fading light and knew with a certainty that 8 years of grief had never let him feel that whatever came next, they would face it exactly like this, together, chosen, and never either one of them alone again. The letter went back down the mountain the next morning, and with it, Silas Crane's stolen valley began to come home to the people he'd taken it from. The Hendersons wept when the marshal returned their South 40. Old man Pruitt got his water rights back and cried like a boy over his well running full again. And every family Crane had cheated in 12 years of quiet stealing found over that fall and winter a piece of their lives restored to them not by charity but by justice, because a broken woman and a hollowed-out man had refused a fortune and asked only that what was stolen be given back. Word of it spread through the valley faster than any fire Crane had ever set. And it changed the way the whole territory said the name Walker. "You know what they're calling you now down in town?" Big Tom asked one afternoon, come up the mountain to help Ethan mend fence, his leg healed enough now to walk on with only a slight hitch. "The two of you—" "Don't reckon I want to know," Ethan said. "The Walkers who could have been kings." Tom said, grinning. "That's what they're saying. The folks who was handed a whole valley on a silver plate and gave it all back to the people it belonged to." He shook his head. "There's men in this territory would have killed for what you two turned down, and you tore up the letter and pitched it in the fire. Ethan, you got no idea what that's done to the way folks see you. You went from monster to legend in the space of one summer. I don't want to be a legend, Ethan said. Legend's just another word folks made up so they don't have to see you plain. I had 8 years of being a story instead of a man. I'd sooner just be Ethan. Well, Tom said, and clapped him on the shoulder, the wounded one healed, now strong again. You're a story whether you like it or not, but at least it's a true one this time, and at least it's a good one. He looked out over the mountain. Folks needed it, you know, after Crane. A valley that spent 12 years being taught to be afraid and greedy and small, it needed to see 2 people be brave and honest and generous instead. You gave 'em something to aim at. That's worth more than all Crane's money ever was. Ethan didn't answer. But that night at supper he told Clara what Tom had said, and she reached across the table and took his hand, and she said, "He's right, you know, about all of it." "You believe that we gave the valley something?" "I know it." Clara's eyes were soft in the lamplight. "I've watched it happen all fall. People are kinder to each other down there than they used to be. The shopkeeper extends credit now to families that are struggling instead of calling their notes the way Crane taught him. The mercantile women, the ones who laughed at me, I saw them taking food to old Widow Barlow last week just because she was alone, and the winter's coming." She squeezed his hand. "Crane spent 12 years teaching that valley to be afraid of each other. And you spent one summer teaching them to trust again. That's what we gave them. We gave them each other back. The seasons turned on that mountain the way they always had, but everything under them was different now. Fall gave way to a hard winter, and it was the first winter in 8 years that Ethan Walker did not spend alone. Clara canned and preserved all through the autumn until the cellar was full, and when the snows came down deep and shut the mountain off from the world below, the 2 of them were not shut off from each other. They passed the long dark evenings by the fire, Clara teaching Ethan his letters at last patient, over the primer she'd sent for the big man, bent over the small book like it might bite him, sounding out words in the firelight, while his wife's hand steadied his under the pencil. "I feel a fool," Ethan muttered one night, wrestling with a sentence. 35 years old and learning to read like a schoolboy." "You feel brave," Clara corrected him gently. "There's nothing braver than a grown man willing to let his wife see him not know something. Most men would rather die than admit it. You just sat down and started learning." She kissed his temple. "You're the least foolish man I ever met, Ethan Walker. Now read me the next line." And he did. And by spring he could read her the scripture off the mantel himself of a Sunday in his slow, careful voice, and it was one of the sweetest sounds she'd ever heard, a man who'd been called a monster reading the Word of God aloud in a home full of love. It was that spring, too, that the last wound between them finally healed. Clara had told him over that long winter in pieces, in the dark, the things she'd never had words for the family in Kansas City, and what the master of the house had tried to take from her the year she turned 19, and how she'd fought him off and been turned out into the street for it with her character ruined, and the whole story twisted to make her the sinner. She told him why she'd flinched that first night at the foot of his bed. She told him all of it, and Ethan Walker held her through every word, and never once did his hands do anything but comfort, and never once did he make her feel she was anything but precious. And in the healing of that telling in the long patient months of a man who asked for nothing and gave everything, the fear that had lived in Clara's body her whole life finally quietly let go. She came to him herself in the spring on a soft night when the last snow had melted off the mountain and the whole world smelled of green and new beginnings. She came to him not out of duty and not out of fear, but out of love, freely given the way she'd given him that first kiss when he lay wounded, and Ethan received her the way he'd received everything from her, with a wonder that never wore off, and a gentleness that told her every moment that she was safe. And afterward, lying in his arms in the dark hole and unafraid, Clara Walker wept. But they were the good tears, the kind that wash a thing clean, and Ethan held her and let her cry them. "I never thought," she whispered against his chest. "I never thought I'd get to have this. A gentleman. A safe place. Love that didn't take anything from me, that only gave." She pressed her hand flat over his heart. "You waited so long, Ethan. A whole year. You never once pushed. You never once made me feel. I told you the first night," Ethan said softly, his hand stroking her hair. "I said I had nothing in this whole world but time, and I'd spend every hour of it waiting on you." His arms tightened around her. "And I'd have waited 10 years, Clara, 20. Forever if that's what you needed. 'Cause it was never the waiting that mattered to me. It was you. Just having you here. Just getting to love you however much you'd let me. That was always enough. It was always more than I ever dreamed I'd get." "It stopped being about waiting a long time ago," Clara said. "This tonight, I didn't do this because you waited long enough to earn it. You never had to earn me, Ethan. I did it because I love you. Because I finally believe all the way down that some love doesn't come with a price. That some men give without taking." She lifted her head to look at him in the dark. "You taught me that. It took you a whole year. But you taught me that a good man exists. And now I know it in my bones. And no one can ever take that knowing from me again." And Ethan Walker, who had lost one wife to a blizzard, and 8 years to grief, and a good name to a wicked man's lies, held his second wife in the spring dark and understood that the good Lord had not forgotten his name after all. He'd only been saving him for this. Their daughter was born the following winter. Clara labored 2 days, and Ethan, who had faced 5 armed men without flinching, very nearly went out of his mind with the helplessness of it, pacing the small cabin useless, while Ada Walker and the midwife shooed him out into the cold again and again. But at the end of the second day, in the deep quiet of a winter night, a small, furious cry rose up in that cabin, and Ada opened the door and put a bundle in Ethan Walker's shaking arms. "A girl," Ada said, beaming. "A fine, strong, healthy girl. And your Clara's tired, but she's fine, Ethan. She's just fine. You go on in and see them both." Ethan looked down at the tiny red squalling face in his arms, his daughter, his child. A whole new person made out of the love between 2 people the world had thrown away, and this man who had not wept when his barn burned, or when the bullet took him, wept now freely without shame, tears falling into the blanket. "Hey," he whispered, choked. "Hey, little one. Hey, I'm your pa." He touched her impossibly small hand with one enormous, careful finger, and her tiny fist closed around it, gripping, and something in Ethan Walker's chest broke open that had been shut for a very long time. "I'm your pa, and I promise you right here, right now, you are never going to spend one single day of your whole life not knowing you're loved. Not one day, not 1 hour. Your ma and me. We know what it is to grow up thrown away, and you never will. You hear me? You are wanted. You were wanted before you ever got here. You are the most wanted little girl in the whole wide world." He carried her into Clara then, and he sat on the edge of the bed, and the 3 of them were together for the first time, the whole family made and chosen and safe. "What'll we call her?" Ethan asked. Clara looked up at him, exhausted and radiant. "I was thinking," she said softly, "we might call her Sarah." Ethan went very still. "Clara, I mean it." She reached up and touched his face. "Sarah was your first love, Ethan. She was part of what made you the man who slept on the floor, so I wouldn't be scared. I wouldn't have my husband without her. And she never got to have a child of her own, and that's a sorrow that ought not just vanish out of the world." Her eyes were wet. "So let's give her name to our girl. Let's carry a little of her forward. There's room in this family for all our ghosts, Ethan. That's how I know it's a real home. There's room in it for everything we've lost, right alongside everything we've found." And Ethan Walker looked at his wife, this woman of such impossible, bottomless grace, who could love him enough to make room in her own child's name for the woman who'd come before, and he could not speak at all. He just bent and pressed his forehead to hers, their daughter cradled between them, and they stayed like that a long time, the 3 of them in the warm quiet of a home that 2 thrown-away people had built out of nothing but each other. The years went on, the way years do. Little Sarah grew up on that mountain, a fierce, laughing, fearless girl, her mother's spirit and her father's steady heart running wild and safe and cherished over the green summer slopes and the deep winter snows. And she was not alone for long, for a brother came after her, and then a sister. And the small cabin that had once held one lonely man grew crowded and loud and full to the rafters with the best kind of chaos. Ethan built onto it with his own hands, room by room. As the family grew, the far wall he'd built alone in his second summer of grief, now the heart of a house full of children. And every board he added was honest, and every nail he drove was driven in love, and the house grew the way the family grew, patient and strong, and rooted deep in the mountain. The valley below prospered too, in those years healed of Crane's poison and grown kind. And the Walkers were its heart, not its kings. They'd refused that, but something better its proof. Proof that a man could come back from the worst the world could do. Proof that the person everyone called a monster might just be the finest soul among them. Proof that love freely given without price, without taking, was the strongest force in all that hard country. Big Tom lived to a great old age and dandled the Walker children on his knee and told them the story, the true story of how their pa had come down a burning mountain to save his life, and how their ma had knelt in the street to fight for it, and how a whole valley had learned to be brave again because of two people who'd had every reason to be bitter and had chosen instead to be good. And Ethan and Clara grew old together on that mountain, exactly as she'd said she wanted, the very first time he'd handed her the choice of a different life. They froze in the winters together, and sweated in the summers together, and buried nothing between them but the ordinary sorrows of a long life fully lived. His dark hair went gray, and then white, and her hands grew worn with the good work of a home well tended, and neither of them was ever not for one single day of all those years alone again. There came an evening near the end of it all when they were both very old, and their children grown and scattered to families of their own down in the valley, and their grandchildren beyond counting. The two of them sat together on the porch of the house Ethan had built board by board in the last gold light of a summer day, the way they had sat 10,000 evenings before. Clara's hand was in Ethan's, the way it had been that first frightened night in the dark, and the way it had been every night since. "You know," Clara said softly, "I've been thinking about that first day, when I climbed off that stage in Ashford Creek with 40 cents and nowhere to go, and every soul in that town told me to run from the monster on the mountain." "I remember," Ethan said. His voice was old now and slow, but it was still the same voice that had said, "Then I'll wait, ma'am," all those years ago. "I remember every minute of it." "I nearly did, you know," Clara said. "Run. There was a moment standing in that street with all of them warning me, I nearly turned around and got back on that stage." She squeezed his gnarled hand. "Can you imagine if I'd run? If I'd listened to them? This whole life, the children, the years, all of it. It hung on one frightened woman deciding to climb a mountain instead of running from it." "But you didn't run," Ethan said. "No." Clara smiled, and even old Even Warn, her smile was the same one that had undone him across a supper table a lifetime ago. "I didn't run. I climbed. And I found the only home I ever had at the top of it." She laid her head on his shoulder the way she had that night she'd first crossed the foot of empty space between them. "They were so sure they knew what you were, Ethan. That whole valley. So sure you were a monster. And they were wrong about everything. Everything that mattered." Ethan was quiet a while, watching the light fade over the mountain he'd lived his whole life on. "You want to know the truth," he said finally. "For a long time I thought they were right. I thought maybe I was a monster. Not for what they said I'd done to Sarah, I knew that was a lie. But inside, I thought all the good in me had died with her in that blizzard, and all that was left was a hard, cold, hollow thing that deserved to be alone." He turned his head and looked at his wife of a lifetime. "And then you climbed up my mountain and cooked me biscuits and gravy and called me a man instead of a monster. And you were the one who turned out to be right. About me. About the good you swore was still in there under all that grief." His old eyes filled the way they always had, easy, unashamed. "You didn't just save my life the night Crane came, Clara. You saved my soul the first week you were here. You looked at a man everybody'd thrown away, and you saw something worth keeping. And because you saw it, it got to be true." Clara lifted his old hand to her lips and kissed it the way Ada had kissed hers that day in the street a lifetime ago. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" she said softly. That's the only thing that ever really mattered in the end. Not the trial, or the land, or Crane, or any of it. Just one person seeing another person plain. Seeing the good in someone the whole world had given up on. And loving them into being who they truly were all along. She smiled. You did it for me too, you know. I climbed up here a woman who'd been taught her whole life that she didn't matter. That she was a burden. A problem. Something to be used up and thrown away. And you looked at me and saw someone worth sleeping on a cold floor for. Worth waiting a whole year for. Worth handing a fortune to and letting her tear it up. Her voice went thick. We saved each other, Ethan. Two people the world threw away, and we climbed out of the throwaway pile hand in hand, and we built a whole life up here, out of nothing but the choosing of each other every single day. The sun was going down now, gold turning to rose over the western peaks, and the first evening star was coming out over the mountain that had been their whole world. Ethan, Clara said. Ma'am. The old joke worn smooth as a riverstone by 50 years of use. Are you glad? She asked. After everything, all of it. The grief and the exile and the bullet and the long hard years. If you could go back, if you could have the easy life, the one without any of the pain, would you take it? Ethan Walker thought about it the way he thought about everything honest and slow. Not for anything in this world, he said. Not 1 minute of it would I trade. 'Cause every hard mile of it led here. To this porch. To your hand in mine. To a whole life so full it near breaks a man to look back on it. He raised her hand and held it against his old heart, the way she'd once laid her head there to prove to herself he was real. I spent 8 years believing the Lord forgot my name. And he didn't. He was just saving me. Saving me for you. For this. For a love I'd never have believed a hollowed-out old cowboy could get to have. His voice dropped gentle, as it had been that very first night, quiet as falling snow. So no, Clara Walker. I wouldn't trade it. I'd walk every hard mile of it again blind and barefoot if it led me back to you. Every single time. Forever. Clara closed her eyes and leaned into the man who had been her whole home for a lifetime, and let the peace of it settle over her like the coming dark. Down in the valley, the lights were coming on in the windows of a town that had learned because of them how to be kind. In houses scattered across the healed land, their children and their children's children were sitting down to suppers full of the love the Walkers had taught the whole valley to believe in again. And up on the mountain, on the porch of a house built board by board out of honest love, an old man and an old woman sat hand in hand in the last light exactly where they had always belonged. They had come to each other as strangers. Two people. The whole world had thrown away a woman with 40 cents and nowhere to go, and a man everyone called a monster. They had married for a shield and a name and nothing more. And out of that, nothing. Out of that cold and frightened and hopeless beginning, they had built the truest thing there is. Not a house, a home, not a bargain, a love, not a place to hide from the world, but a place to belong in it together, unafraid. And that is the whole truth of Ethan and Clara Walker and the mountain they made their own. A person is never defined by their past or their poverty or the wounds the world has dealt them. A person is defined by how they choose to treat one another when the whole world is watching and expecting the worst. Ethan Walker was called a monster by a valley that needed one, and he answered every cruelty with kindness until the truth of him could no longer be denied. And Clara Bennett was thrown away by everyone who should have loved her, and she refused to grow hard, and climbed a mountain toward the one gentle thing left in the world, and found it, and it was enough. Home was never the place where either of them was born. Home was never a house or a fortune or a soft and easy life. Home was the person who chose to stand beside them when the whole world walked away. And having found that having built it, and fought for it, and kept it all the way to the end of their long and blessed lives, Ethan and Clara Walker wanted for nothing else ever again.